Lord of Mysteries: The Arrival of the New Black Emperor by Huo Yang. Chapter 76-100. Around 2 p.m., David brought his coworker over. His coworker was named Bob, his clothes were dirty and torn, his hair was messy, and he leaned on a crutch made from a tree branch. Hobert inquired about the details of the incident. The process was actually very simple. Bob was working when one of his legs and one hand got caught in a machine, resulting in a disability. After listening to the person involved, Hobert clearly stated, although Mr. Bob also made a mistake in this matter, it does not affect our ability to claim compensation. He then said to Bob, but this case will still be very difficult, you need to be mentally prepared. Bob was already somewhat disheartened. He waved his arm, which was only half remaining. Sir, I have nothing left to lose now, and there won't be a worse outcome than this. Hobert nodded. One more thing. If you want to win the case, follow my instructions completely. No problem, Bob said, I'm already very grateful that you accepted my delegation. If there are no other questions, please sign the power of attorney. Hobert took out the contract he had prepared earlier. Due to the difficulty of this case, I will charge an 18% commission fee on the compensation amount. Of course, if we win the case, this money will be paid by the opposing party. No existence town, South Continent. Elliot received notice that he was to accompany Elder Calvin to Crowley City to negotiate with the Forsake Empire. What puzzled him was that the other accompanying Bach family members were all recognized elites, and he had just been promoted to Sequence 7, so it seemed it wasn't his turn to participate in such an important operation. He suspected that his recent performance had made the elders suspicious, so he took the opportunity before setting off to pray to the Creator in his room and reported his movements and suspicions. After lunch, Elliot and the others, led by Calvin, left the town in 5 carriages. Not long after leaving the town, a majestic throne and a towering figure appeared before Elliot. Understood. Elliot breathed a sigh of relief, no longer having any worries about this trip. 192 Blanca Street, Backland. Hobert also believed Elliot's guess was correct. An extraordinary characteristic Bach family plagued by a curse could not lack this level of vigilance. Then Hobert began to consider whether to let more Bach family members know of his existence. In the previous raid by the ruined mercenary, Elliot played a significant role, and the psychic necklace he sacrificed was also very practical. Especially when Hobert thought that he would later play the role of Baron, or Count. It would certainly be difficult for him to obtain a peerage in Backland, but it would be different in the South Continent. Although it would still be difficult to obtain a peerage, he could gain the real power of a baron or count. Seriously developing the Bach family line would definitely be very useful for his future role-playing. Therefore, Hobert planned to systematically support Elliot, making him a strong member of the Bach family and his spokesperson within the Bach family. In that case, he would have to demonstrate his strength. With the existence of the country of disorder, Hobert could project powerful forces, although only in the aspects of order and distortion, but it could solve many practical problems. If the problems could not be solved, it did not matter. It meant that the great existence on the Iron Throne was not interested in their prayers, and he had the final right of interpretation. With this decision, Hobert waited for the elder named Calvin to probe. If nothing unexpected happened, he would definitely look for an opportunity to probe Elliot. This matter was not urgent. What concerned Hobert now was whether there would be any magical items he could use at the Sunday gathering. He wondered if his money would be enough. In fact, for Hobert now, the psychic necklace solved his weakness of low inspiration, and the fighting ring solved his weakness of poor combat skills. He did not have any particularly desired magical items. But what if there was something good? The extraordinary characteristic world never lacked surprises. With anticipation, Hobert arrived at the Mercenary Club early on Sunday with all his belongings, and after practicing shooting, he waited in the sofa area for the gathering to begin. Around noon, more and more people gathered in the sofa area. Hobert also saw the officer who had taken the secret supplicant extraordinary characteristic at the last gathering. The two shook hands and chatted briefly. Through the idle chat, he learned that the other party also planned to acquire a few things at today's gathering. Still at 1:30 p.m., the gathering in the underground theater began. Sure enough, after 2 team-up requests, someone started selling Hunter Pathway and Warrior Pathway extraordinary characteristics, and some people were selling magical items. Among them were several people Hobert recognized, who were participants in the South Continent raid. However, most of what was sold today were extraordinary characteristics and combat-type magical items. Hobert was not interested in extraordinary characteristics, and the combat-type magical items overlapped with the fighting ring's abilities. Hobert did not make a move until the end of the trading session. Hobert was not in a hurry either. He estimated that there would be mercenaries selling spoils of war for the next few weeks, and he learned through the idle chat in the sofa area at noon that often the later it was, the better the items would be. During the exchange session, Castor Augustus, the mercenary captain who went to the South Continent this time, stood up and said, "After this battle, there is a certain power vacuum in Warlord General Anthony's territory. If the Forsake Empire does not fill this vacuum within a month, a small war to seize colonies is likely to occur." Hobert crossed his arms. "As far as I know, someone is already willing to fill this vacuum state." He certainly would not disclose the inside information he got from Elliot at this gathering. Castor then took out a sketch. "Has anyone seen or heard of this powerful person?" Everyone carefully examined the sketch. It was a mysterious figure sitting on a throne made of swords, looking solemn and sacred. Hobert was stunned. This looks like me." Castor said. "We encountered this powerful person during this mission, but this powerful person did not show much malice towards us. If anyone has seen this, sir, or can provide effective clues, I will definitely reward them handsomely." Everyone noticed that Castor used the title, "Sir," indicating that the other party was powerful enough to command Castor's respect. Hobert thought to himself, "You probably never dreamed that I, sir, am sitting here watching your surprised and confused expressions." He naturally would not provide clues. He was a rich man now, and there was no need to cause this trouble for the so-called heavy reward. Seeing no one respond, Castor was a little disappointed. He had a premonition that this would definitely be a figure who would stir up the extraordinary characteristic forces in General Anthony's territory in the future. If they could make friends with the other party as soon as he appeared, it would definitely deal a heavy blow to the Forsake Empire's colonies. On Monday morning, Hobert didn't go to work. Instead, he took Barton Lawyer's letter of recommendation and rode a carriage to the Ministry of Justice located in the West District. At this time, there was no civil service examination system, and there was no unified examination time for lawyers nationwide. One needed a letter of recommendation from a great lawyer like Barton Lawyer, or a professor of law, to be eligible to apply for the lawyer examination. The Ministry of Justice had dedicated staff and areas for lawyer qualification examinations. Basically, they tested one person at a time. The written part was not difficult, only requiring the memorization of some laws and regulations. The interview part was more difficult. Candidates had to immediately determine which law or regulation applied to the case presented by the examiner. However, with Barton Lawyer's endorsement, Hobert's examination process went smoothly. At least he wasn't deliberately made things difficult. This made Hobert, as he walked out of the Ministry of Justice, sigh. The ruined kingdom's society truly values connections and relationships. No wonder the regulations regarding work-related injury compensation are so vague, because workers simply have no channels to formulate regulations that protect their own interests. It was already around 11 o'clock when he returned to the law firm. As soon as Hobert entered, he was told that Miss Hugh had been waiting for him all morning. Upon arriving at his office, he indeed saw Hugh, with somewhat coarse hair, waiting by the desk, along with a 40-something-year-old stranger who looked somewhat anxious. Upon seeing Hobert, Hugh immediately stood up. "Hobert, I finally waited for you. I'm here to seek your help." Hobert immediately understood that Hugh was introducing business to him. "Please wait in the reception room." After inviting Hugh and the stranger to the reception room, Hobert first went to Barton Lawyer's office, briefly explained today's examination process, and expressed his gratitude. Then he poured 2 cups of coffee and went to the reception room. Through conversation, Hobert learned that the man Hugh brought was named Sean, a department store merchant. About 3 years ago, a friend of Sean's borrowed £300 in cash from him and wrote an IOU. However, when Mr. Sean went to collect the debt last year, his friend refused to repay, claiming that there was no repayment date on the IOU. After about a year of wrangling, the matter finally went to court. Sean had always thought that he would surely win with the IOU in hand, but when he chatted with a friend who knew a little about law yesterday, Sean realized that whether he could win the lawsuit was still an unknown due to the lack of a repayment date on the IOU. This Tuesday, which is tomorrow, the court session will begin, and only then did Sean intend to hire a lawyer, but he did not have the relevant channels or connections, so he sought help from Miss Hugh, a highly prestigious arbitrator nearby. Hugh had this self-awareness. Seeking her for arbitration was fine, but asking her to defend in court, she knew she would definitely act like a curly-haired baboon. So she brought Sean to seek Hobert's help. Hobert looked at Sean's IOU. Your friend has missed the point. I guess if the other party also hires a lawyer, he will definitely try to invalidate this IOU. The method is also very simple, because from a legal perspective, an IOU only has a 3-year statute of limitations. If a repayment date is specified, the time will be calculated from the repayment date on the IOU. There is no repayment date on this IOU, and this IOU has already exceeded 3 years. It would be troublesome if the judge really ruled the IOU invalid. Sean opened his mouth. Then, what should I do? Hugh smoothed her ruffled hair. She now felt very much like a curly-haired baboon, because, like Sean, she only vaguely understood Hobert's meaning, only knowing that the situation was not optimistic. Of course, we break the other party's line of reasoning. Hobert smiled. I already have a good idea. If you entrust me to be your lawyer, please sign the retainer agreement, and I will go to defend you tomorrow. Sean asked almost reflexively, can we win? According to regulations, I cannot make you a promise. Hobert spread his hands. I only know that if you don't hire a lawyer, tomorrow will be very passive. Sean considered for more than 10 seconds, and finally signed the power of attorney. Because this case had a certain degree of difficulty, Hobert asked for a 12% commission fee. According to convention, such cases typically charge a 15% commission, but out of consideration for Miss Hugh, I will only ask for 12%. In fact, there was no such convention, but his words made both Hugh and Sean very happy. Hugh felt Hobert's respect for her, while Sean felt he saved 3%. After seeing off Hugh and Sean, Hobert sighed with emotion. Finally, I've taken on a somewhat normal case. From the very first case of his legal career, it had been filled with abnormalities. Not a single case could be completely resolved in court. So much so that as a legal assistant, he was somewhat unfamiliar with the magistrate's court. After lunch, Hobert first considered how to defend Mr. Sean. Around 2 o'clock, he went out to visit clients. Hobert arrived at 192 Blanca Street, not far away. At exactly 3 o'clock, his vision was submerged in gray fog, and the Tarot Club officially began. This time, Hobert and the other two did not receive Rosal the Great's diary, so they directly skipped to the trading segment. The Hanged Man, Alger said to Hobert, I need more information about the elf. What do you wish to receive as compensation? Hobert was startled. You found an elf ruin. Justice. Audrey also quickly recalled the transaction between the Emperor and the Hanged Man when he first attended the gathering. At that time, the Emperor told the Hanged Man that there was a chance of finding the Sailor Pathway potion formula in the elf ruins. Alger said, I'm not very sure if it's an elf ruin, so I want to get some more detailed information from you. Hobert pondered for a moment before saying, Mr. Hanged Man, I think you should be aware that the elf belonged to the Second Epoch, and any detailed information about the Second Epoch is priceless in modern times. Alger nodded with a somewhat unpleasant expression. I know. Don't be so serious. I just want to remind you that this information is very valuable. You cannot let this information leak out, otherwise you will be very dangerous. Hobert changed his tone. Don't worry, I will offer you an acceptable reward. Because he didn't intend to trade too important information about the elf with the hanged man, otherwise the hanged man would definitely not be able to afford the reward for this transaction. Alger breathed a sigh of relief. Thank you, I know what to do. Audrey was incredibly excited, not expecting to hear some distant history of the second epic. The fool, Klein also listened attentively. Hobert organized his words. The elf liked to make animal blood into a state similar to, like cheese and like jelly for consumption. Their utensils are very different from the ones we use. They use 2 small wooden sticks to put food from the utensil into their mouths. I remember Rosal the Great once tried to promote this type of utensil. Hobert estimated that, the great mysterious Mr. the Fool, behind the grey fog should have made some connections by now. He continued, the elf are similar in appearance to humans, but their ears are pointed, and their tempers are unusually volatile. This should be related to the extraordinary characteristic within their bodies. The Elf King was once an ally of the Giant King, but later became a mortal enemy, warring with each other for many years. Hobert smiled. I guarantee you, unless you become a high-ranking member of a church, you will absolutely not be able to access these materials. Because elf culture is very different from current culture, I can't describe it too concretely to you, but I can help you identify whether what you encounter is an elf ruin, provided I need to see the murals or decorative patterns appearing in the ruin. Hobert only spoke of some information that was not too confidential, even some trivial details. As for the elf's homeland, the Elf King's subordinate deity, Queen of Calamity, and other more confidential information, he did not intend to tell the hanged man just yet. However, this was already enough to shock the other 3. Alger was somewhat lost in thought. He had not expected the Emperor to truly know so many details about the elf. He certainly understood how valuable this knowledge was. As the Emperor said, unless one was a regional bishop or cardinal of a church, it would be impossible to know this information, yet the Emperor could not possibly be a regional bishop or cardinal. Audrey, on the other hand, became even more curious about that ancient race, while Klein's mind was filled with chopsticks and Mao Shuiwang. After a few seconds, Alger came back to his senses. I can present the patterns from the ruin. Mr. the Fool, please help me present them. Klein slowly nodded and materialized paper and pen in front of Alger. Alger picked up the pen, and patterns with obvious differences from the cultures of the various countries and ethnic groups on the north-south continent immediately appeared on the paper. Hobert took a look. There were 2 types of patterns. One was like the Chinese character, times, weight looking like clusters of clouds arranged together. One was like a tilted letter, S, but with an extra hook at the top and bottom, resembling layers of ocean waves continuously rolling forward. This was thunder pattern. Although it had obvious differences from the thunder pattern, in Hobert's impression, the abstract yet realistic, unrestrained charm of Eastern culture, which should be called West Continent culture here, was still present. Hobert said, these patterns have distinct elf cultural characteristics. What you encountered should be an elf ruin. Alger asked again, this ruin should have been discovered by many people, but after entering it, my spirituality can still feel some resonance. Why is that? Congratulations. Hobert smiled. If you explore the ruin in depth, you will definitely find extraordinary characteristic or extraordinary materials of the same sequence as yours. Alger's eyes lit up. How can I find them? Hobert smiled. I suggest you try using your extraordinary ability in the ruin. Perhaps it will trigger a stronger resonance and help you find more clues. He paused and then said, all right, we should discuss how you will pay the remuneration. Alger asked, what do you want from me? The first remuneration is your exploration results. Hobert said, I am also very interested in elf ruins, so one of the remunerations is that I want to know the exploration results. Alger nodded, no problem. Hobert then said, the other remuneration is £1,000 in cash, or items, materials, or information of equivalent value. Of course, I don't have an urgent need right now, so you can owe it. Alger breathed a sigh of relief. This quote was indeed acceptable, no problem. The transaction concluded, and the gathering moved to the exchange segment. Audrey spoke first. I recently met a Beander with many channels. He seems to be only sequence 9, but he can complete many seemingly difficult transactions through his channels. For example, in one transaction, he explained how to cleverly use extraordinary ability to defeat one's past self. Upon hearing this, Hobert realized that she was talking about him. Audrey continued, I didn't find too many Beander characteristics on him, but I remember he solemnly said he was a lawyer. Is there a lawyer sequence potion? Hobert scratched his head. This is the terrifying thing about audience. I clearly concealed my extraordinary ability, but Audrey still got many clues. Yes, Alger replied concisely. Audrey nodded and did not continue to ask about the lawyer's extraordinary ability, because if she did, the hanged man would definitely demand remuneration, and it was not her first time attending the gathering. She was unwilling to pay for such a non-urgent question. Hobert changed the topic. To my knowledge, a ruined mercenary team ambushed Beander from the Forsake Empire in the South Continent. This battle eliminated 2 Sequence 5 from the Forsake Empire. Alger smiled. Mercenaries again. It seems Ruin has no desire for war recently, not even a small naval battle involving more than a dozen ships. Then Audrey asked some questions about acting and digestion, and the fool enlightened her on the feeling of digesting a potion. With the end of this topic, the gathering also drew to a close. Leaving the gray fog, Hobert returned to his rented room. He stretched, ready to go back to the office to continue researching Mr. Sean's case and Bob's case. Hobert lay on the bed with some emotion. Encountering normal cases actually made him busier. In the eastern part of the raging sea, on an unnamed small island, Alger found an excuse to separate from the ghost ship's sailor and went alone to the ruin in the middle of the island. Only a few crooked stone pillars remained of the ruin. They had originally been covered in vines, but a sailor from Alger's ship discovered the site while searching for fresh water, and they had since cleared the vines from the pillars. In the middle of the stone pillars, there was a clear green pool, bottomless. Alger had ordered the sailor to dive down to search, but they found nothing. It was likely that those who discovered this ruin before had also searched, and if the secrets within the ruin were easily discoverable, the contents would probably have been taken long ago. Alger first circled the pool, then, following the Emperor's suggestion, created a whirlpool in the pool using his extraordinary ability. Suddenly, Alger saw a white halo appear at the bottom of the pool, as if a lamp had lit up in the pool. It really worked. Alger once again admired the Emperor's knowledge of mysticism. At the same time, he thought that the people who discovered this ruin before might have been pirates, and they did not have as much mystical knowledge as the Emperor. As long as they dived down and found nothing, they would not continue to explore. Waiting for the vortex to disappear, Alger took off his coat, ready to go down and check. But after the vortex disappeared, the halo below also disappeared. Alger immediately understood. He used his ability again to create a vortex in the pool, then jumped into the pool and dived down in the rapids. In the water, Alger's body appeared with faint, illusory scales, even more flexible than a fish. He could now stay underwater for a long time. He dived down more than 10 meters, until the mouth of the pool looked very distant, until the surroundings gradually became dark. Alger finally saw clearly what was glowing underwater. They were 2 crystal-like stones, and in the middle of the 2 crystals was a cave entrance just big enough for one person. There were many such cave entrances in the pool. Even the most skilled sailor would not dare to explore such stone caves where it was easy to get lost. The 2 glowing crystals looked like ordinary stones during normal times, so the sailors who explored before did not notice anything unusual. Inside the stone cave, there were also glowing crystals, seemingly guiding the way, or perhaps illuminating. Alger carefully swam into the cave entrance. No danger appeared, so he swam forward with peace of mind. The water level got higher and higher, and finally Alger broke out of the water and arrived in a dark cave. Alger climbed onto a rock by the water, took out a waterproof small torch, lit it, and illuminated the entire cave. He first saw a skeleton on the ground not far from him, with some sundries next to it. This skeleton was nothing special except for the scepter in its hand. The other hand of the skeleton pointed to the other side of the cave. Alger followed the skeleton's finger to the other side of the cave, where there was a huge mural. The mural was well preserved and still had color to this day. Approaching the mural, Alger found that the figures inside all had pointed ears, giving people a sacred feeling. Alger roughly understood the content depicted in the mural. The skeleton sitting in the distance was a descendant of a mixed elf and human race. The skeleton's family had always maintained the elf way of life, and at the same time, the skeleton's family had inherited a secret about the elf. The skeleton on the ground did not become a Beander. He was the last member of this family. He painted the elf secret inherited by his family into a mural during his lifetime. The so-called secret was the location where the last 3 high-ranking elves fell. That is to say, at these 3 locations, it is very likely to find the extraordinary characteristic left by the high-ranking elves. Alger glanced at the skeleton sitting on the ground. Such an important secret, why did he paint it on a mural? Shouldn't such a secret rather be taken to the grave and completely buried, rather than revealed to others? Suddenly, Alger recalled that the emperor had said that an extraordinary characteristic has 3 laws, and he only knew one. He vaguely realized that the reason the skeleton left the mural should be related to the law of extraordinary characteristic. As soon as he thought of asking the emperor for extraordinary knowledge again, Alger felt a little sour. He already owed the emperor 1,000 pounds. Was he going to bear a heavier debt? At this time, he looked at the scepter in the skeleton's hand. The scepter seemed to be made of crystal, with a blue gem at the top. When Alger got the scepter, he suddenly heard the sound of waves in his ears, and then he realized that he could use the 3 abilities of storm, huge waves, and communicating with sea monsters. This made Alger laugh out loud with joy. As a navigator, he could only cast some water-related spells, such as vortex, such as changing ocean currents in a small area, and that was all. Only with the grace of the Storm of Lord can navigators and Wind-Blessed cast more powerful spells, otherwise they have to wait until Sequence 5 or even Sequence 4 to use abilities like huge waves. And the scepter in his hand allowed Alger to be like a blessed one of the Storm of Lord, able to cast practical and powerful abilities at sea. This is not to say that Alger possessed the ability of Sequence 5. This scepter is more like the recognition of the sea, equivalent to a certain type of certificate. With it, Alger can engage in a certain profession. That is to say, it is only useful in the hands of navigators and Wind-Blessed of the Sailor Pathway. Beyonders of other pathways cannot use abilities like huge waves at all. The emperor was right. Alger muttered to himself, searching for elf ruins can really find good things on the Sailor Pathway. This scepter alone, if traded in the raging sea, would cost at least 3,000 pounds, and there would definitely be a premium. Of course, Alger would absolutely not sell the scepter in his hand before becoming Sequence 5. Thinking about it this way, the 1,000 pounds spent were really worth it. On Tuesday morning, Hobert arrived at the magistrate's court early, changed into his barrister's robe, put on his wig, and sat with Sean, preparing for the hearing. Several observers came to the magistrate's court this time. In addition to Sean's family, there were also Zio and Furs. At 8:30 a.m., the judge took his seat, and the court officially opened. Hobert, as the plaintiff's lawyer, first presented the IOU, stating the fact that the defendant borrowed 300 pounds in cash from Sean. As Hobert expected yesterday, the defendant's lawyer, according to relevant laws and regulations, believed that this IOU had exceeded 3 years and should be deemed legally invalid. Hobert was waiting for the other party to argue like this: "Your Honor, our side waives the right to win for this IOU. In some cases, the plaintiff has the right to win. For example, if the judge ruled that Sean's IOU had legal effect, then Sean would directly win the case. But the problem now is that, according to relevant laws and regulations, it is difficult for the judge to make a clear judgment on whether this IOU has legal effect. At this time, it depends on the arguments of both lawyers. Whichever side's interpretation of the relevant laws and regulations is more convincing to the judge will make a ruling in favor of that side. This is precisely the value of a lawyer. So Hobert simply didn't argue with the other party, and used legal loopholes to find a new breakthrough. His decision to waive the right to win surprised both the judge and the defendant's lawyer. According to normal thinking, as the plaintiff's lawyer, he should strive to defend the right to win. Hobert continued, "Yes, you heard correctly, we waive the right to win of this IOU, and no longer accuse the other party of overdue non-repayment of the loan, but accuse the other party of borrowing money and not repaying it. Defendant, do you admit to borrowing £300 in cash from Mr. Sean?" The defendant's lawyer immediately understood Hobert's intention. He leaned back in his chair, no longer having any thought of defending. Because now, whether the defendant admits it or not, these £300 in cash must be repaid. When asked by Hobert, the defendant almost reflexively said, "I did not borrow this money, this is Sean's false accusation." Hobert nodded. "Okay, since you say so, it means I can apply for compulsory enforcement. Although I have waived the right to win of the IOU, the evidence provided by Mr. Sean is sufficient to prove that you did have the act of borrowing money, so the contractual nature of this IOU is still there, and you must repay the money." When the defendant heard compulsory enforcement, his scalp immediately tingled. I borrowed money, yes, I borrowed the money." Hobert nodded. "Okay then, please repay the money within 3 weeks, otherwise it will be considered refusal to repay, and our side will apply for compulsory enforcement." Hobert's defense was brilliant. He effectively dodged his opponent's attacks while using an unexpected strike to block all their escape routes. However, Hobert also knew that the victory in this lawsuit was largely due to his opponent being too cooperative. He had considered this issue yesterday. If Barton had defended the defendant, he would never have insisted that the IOU had no legal effect. Doing so would either lead to an endless argument with the plaintiff's lawyer or allow the plaintiff's lawyer, like Hobert, to exploit loopholes in relevant regulations. These were not situations the defendant's lawyer would want to see. Of course, this was just a hypothetical. Barton wouldn't be interested in such a small case. Soon, the judge issued a verdict, ordering the defendant to clear the debt within 3 weeks. The moment the judge rendered the verdict, Hobert once again felt the exhilaration of digesting the potion. He immediately summarized, "Was this potion digestion because I completed the commission? No, completing a commission only makes one's spirituality more active. Was it because I used legal rules? No." Hobert suddenly had an epiphany. It was a loophole. I used a loophole in the regulations. Compared to previous potion digestions, Hobert found that the potion digested by winning through exploiting a loophole this time was similar to the potion digested when taking actions favorable to himself by using rules. Being good at using rules and good at finding and using loopholes within those rules, this is the core of a lawyer. Hobert smiled knowingly. By acting according to this principle, the speed of potion digestion would be faster than he had planned. Perhaps with just 2 or 3 more cases like this, he would be able to completely digest the potion. After the court adjourned, Sean warmly shook Hobert's hand and said, "This is the most brilliant debate I have ever seen." Yesterday, when he signed the power of attorney with Hobert, he was still 100% uneasy, thinking Hobert was too young and only a legal assistant, unsure if he could contend with the opposing lawyer. Today, seeing the defendant's frustrated expression, Sean felt that the lawyer's fee was truly worth it. Coming to the public gallery, Furs smiled and said, "When Shula brought me here, I thought I would see 2 lawyers arguing word for word over some legal provisions that would make one want to fall asleep. I didn't expect you to win so cleanly and decisively. This gave me a lot of inspiration. I should come and listen to your defenses more often in the future. Perhaps I can also write a novel with a lawyer as the protagonist." Hobert smiled and said, "Tomorrow I will also be here to defend the plaintiff. If you are willing to come, you can attend again, but that defense will likely be very difficult." Tomorrow, he would be here to defend Bob. The few people chatted for a while and then left separately. The defendant had already agreed to repay the loan within this week. Mr. Sean would only pay Hobert's commission after the other party repaid the money. Hobert did not return to the law firm but instead took a taxi carriage to the Ministry of Justice to collect his lawyer's license. Starting today, he was an official lawyer, which qualified him to defend cases in formal courts. Of course, the premise was that someone would hire him for their defense. Cases in formal courts were generally criminal cases or disputes of interest among nobles. As long as they could afford it, they would hire senior lawyers to fight their lawsuits. The most common work for official lawyers was still preparing defense materials for senior lawyers, with few opportunities to appear in court. If people could not afford lawyer fees, they would likely choose not to hire a lawyer, because ordinary lawyers were simply no match for senior lawyers. They would often spend money and still lose, so it was better to not pay and accept their fate. Such thoughts and the current situation limited the opportunities for ordinary lawyers like Hobert to appear in court. However, Hobert believed that his lawyer's license might be needed in Bob's case. Thinking about tomorrow's defense, he was actually a bit apprehensive, unsure if his plan would succeed. During dinner, Donna noticed Hobert's distraction. "Hobert, you seem a bit absent-minded." "I'm thinking about tomorrow's defense strategy." Hobert smiled and said, "This will be a huge test for me." "Ha ha ha, pressure is a good thing." Christine laughed, "It means you are making progress." He sighed, "This reminds me of my experiences in the South Continent. Back then, I was a young man about your age." Thus, the dinner table's regular program, The General's Stories in the South Continent, began. However, as soon as Christine's story started, Donna unceremoniously interrupted, "You blew up the enemy's bunker together, right? Father, you've told that story before, so, you two captured 9 enemies, right? Father, you've told that story too." Watching Christine deep in thought, unsure if he was inventing a new story or trying to recall his glorious deeds, Hobert smiled knowingly, and his mood immediately improved a lot. The next day, Hobert arrived at the magistrate's court early, and to his surprise, Bob arrived even earlier. He was still leaning on that crutch made from a tree branch, and his clothes were tattered with several obvious holes, but they had clearly been washed, looking much cleaner than when they last met. His hair was also tidied, which made him look much more energetic. The two exchanged smiles and entered the magistrate's court one after the other, one sitting in the plaintiff's seat and the other in the plaintiff's lawyer's seat. At this point, Hobert quietly said to Bob, "I said before that this case is very difficult. This isn't grandstanding, it's because we can easily become enemies of many people, and even the judge might stand against us." Bob nodded. "Lawyer, I understand how rare it is for you to be sitting next to me." Hobert smiled. "I'm not boasting. I just hope to gain your complete trust. After the court opens later, no matter what response I make, you must support it." "I trust you, lawyer," Bob said. "David told me about you accepting their commission and helping them recover their losses." Hobert nodded. "That's good then." After that, it was a wait for the court to open. Gradually, a few people appeared in the public gallery, David and Robin, a few of Bob's co-workers, and Fur sitting in the corner. At exactly 9 o'clock, the judge took his seat, and the court officially opened. As the plaintiff's lawyer, Hobert first elaborated on the fact that Bob was crippled in the defendant's factory and lost his ability to work. "We will not renege on our debt," the defense lawyer smiled and said, "Mr. Arnold is a benevolent rich man. He has already paid Mr. Bob's medical expenses according to relevant regulations and will compensate Mr. Bob with a one-time payment of £100. Hobert said, "This is exactly what I want to say. £100 is simply not enough to sustain Mr. Bob's future life. So what? We need at least £1,000 in compensation." Upon hearing this, several gasps of surprise were heard. The defense lawyer shook his head. "Plaintiff's lawyer, this is a courtroom, not a circus, and you are not a clown telling some bad jokes on stage. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. On the judge's bench, the wrinkled judge shook his head, indicating his disagreement with Hobert's absurd request. In the audience, Bob's coworkers were all worried for Bob. They knew that Mr. Arnold would definitely not accept £1,000 in compensation. They thought this might be Hobert's way of bargaining. Furs, on the other hand, looked at the expressionless Hobert thoughtfully. She had a strange feeling, as if she had only truly met Hobert today. Hobert, in the courtroom, was not angered by the opposing lawyer mocking him as a clown. He said seriously, "Defendant's lawyer, you don't understand clowns at all. Behind every comedy is a core of tragedy." The defendant's lawyer was clearly stunned, and Arnold's secretary, who was sitting in the defendant's seat, coldly reminded Hobert, "Don't be too greedy. If your demands exceed the relevant regulations, you won't get a single penny." Hobert said, "Our demands are not excessive at all. It's just that in this world, reasonable demands have become excessive." The defendant's lawyer laughed and said, "We don't have time to discuss philosophy with you, Judge, please make your judgment." The judge asked Hobert, plaintiff's lawyer, "Are you maintaining your current demands?" "Yes." The judge sighed. He cleared his throat and was about to announce the verdict when Hobert said, "Your Honor, please wait." The judge smiled and said, "It seems you've changed your mind." "No, my side is withdrawing this claim." As soon as these words came out, a few gasps were heard again. Both the judge and the defendant's lawyer were baffled by Hobert's action. Hobert continued, "My side will accuse Arnold of causing my client's disability due to inaction." "Yes, you heard me right, my side will accuse Arnold of intentional injury." Amidst the uproar, the defendant's lawyer turned pale and said, "Your accusation is not valid. Mr. Arnold did not directly harm your client. My client was disabled while working for Arnold. The causal relationship is established, and Arnold has an unshirkable responsibility." "That's right, he was disabled at work, but it wasn't Mr. Arnold who caused his disability. The causal relationship is not established. Knowing that the machines in the workshop were dangerous, as the person in charge of the factory, Arnold did not provide effective warnings, which led to my client's disability. This is a consequence of Arnold's inaction, and Arnold has an unshirkable responsibility." The defendant's lawyer leaned back in his chair with an unpleasant expression. He clearly needed to organize his words before launching a new counterattack. At this moment, applause broke out in the audience. Although they did not understand Hobert's strategy, they knew that Hobert had won this round of confrontation. Furs also clapped. She had to write this wonderful debate into her next book. At this moment, the judge belatedly struck the gavel. "Gentlemen, your defense is already a criminal defense. This court does not accept your defense results." Hobert said, "Your Honor, I will prepare the relevant materials and transfer this case to a formal court." The judge nodded. "All right, good luck, young man, your thinking is quite brilliant." "All right," court dismissed. Hobert once again felt the signs of the potion being digested, and it was faster than expected. He estimated that even without other commissions, his potion would be completely digested after this lawsuit with Bob. After the judge left, Bob's coworkers came over and talked and laughed loudly with Bob. Bob sincerely said to Hobert, "Thank you, Hobert." Hobert smiled and said, "This is just the first step. The truly difficult part of this lawsuit is yet to come." "No, no, no, Mr. Hobert." Bob smiled and said, "To see Baker, that dog of Arnold's, turn pale and have no way of dealing with me in the defendant's seat today, this lawsuit was worth it." His several co-workers laughed unrestrainedly, all saying that today's trip was not in vain. The group arrived at the entrance of the magistrate's court. Bob's co-workers greeted them and then went back to work. Hobert looked at their backs. "In Backland, it's rare to see co-workers as close as you are. Because we are all believers of the God of steam and machinery." Bob smiled and said, "We often go to church together and discuss the glory of the God of steam and machinery." Hobert nodded. "Faith indeed has such an effect. Where do you live? I will inform you of the court date by letter, but it will probably be next week, or the week after." Bob smiled bitterly and said, "I don't have a fixed residence, but I can go to the law firm every day and wait for you to get off work." Hobert pondered for a moment. I'll send you to the poorhouse. Bob smiled bitterly again. The poorhouse doesn't accept disabled people. Then what kind of poor are they helping? Hobert sneered. I have a way, but if anyone asks you what your faith is again, you must answer Black Knight Goddess. Bob opened his mouth. Sorry, sir, I don't want to change my faith. I'm not asking you to change your faith. This is just a way to survive, it's not asking you to give up anything. Hobert said, you can continue to believe in the god of steam and machinery in your heart, even though these gods don't care about the lives of their believers. Bob was a little uneasy. Sir. Hobert waved his hand. All right, it's settled. Otherwise, if the lawsuit isn't finished and my client starves to death, that would be my disgrace. He was about to hail a taxi carriage not far away when a simple four-wheeled carriage stopped in front of them. The carriage door opened, and the defendant's lawyer from the courtroom, sitting in the carriage, looked down and said, Hobert, I think we should discuss today's case again. Hobert, however, walked along the roadside and said, I don't think that's necessary. The defendant's lawyer had no choice but to have the coachman follow slowly. It's very necessary. Please stop, please stop. Hobert ignored the other party and continued to walk forward. Is it your politeness to ask others for help condescendingly? The defendant's lawyer had no choice but to get out of the car somewhat awkwardly. Please get in, there's still room for discussion on this matter. Okay. Hobert helped Bob into the carriage. I think you can just come up by yourself. Hobert shook his head. I will not make any negotiations with you in the absence of my client. Defendant's lawyer. Then fine. Bob, don't bring your stick in, it will poke a hole in the carpet in the car. Baker, inside the carriage, frowned as he watched Bob get in, and moved to the other side of the carriage, trying to keep his distance from Bob. The defendant's lawyer took out a checkbook. How about £150? This is already Mr. Arnold's greatest mercy. Hobert shook his head. In my opinion, Arnold's mercy is truly laughable. Gentlemen, even a hunting dog is worth £50. Don't you think such a small compensation is an insult to human dignity? It's not that serious. The defense attorney smiled. This is just an ordinary industrial injury case, let's not complicate things further. Yes, you've grown accustomed to not treating people as human beings, Hobert said. You think this industrial injury case should be handled this way, and that's the saddest part. The defense attorney waved his hand. All right, let's talk about something practical. Even if you were to sue Mr. Arnold for intentional harm, your chances of winning are very low, so why not settle? How about £200? This already far exceeds Mr. Arnold's obligation. Hobert shook his head. £1,000. The defense attorney's face turned ashen. Your demand will make it impossible for us to continue negotiations. Very well, goodbye. Hobert opened the carriage door and helped Bob alight. Beck, who had been silent all this time, said sinisterly, Mr. Arnold will use all his connections to make sure you lose. You won't get a single penny. Hobert smiled. Why do I feel like you're scared? Why do your words sound so lacking in confidence? Beck snorted, closed the carriage door without a word, and the coachman cracked his whip, the carriage slowly departing. Bob, picking up his cane, suddenly said, Mr. Hobert, if you had agreed to their demands just now, I wouldn't have blamed you. Hobert waved at a hansom cab and laughed. One must always have some aspirations. Arriving at the Obsidian Bar in the North District, Hobert asked Bob to wait outside. He went in, ordered a beer, and tipped the bartender, asking him to call Miss Daly over. This place was very close to Blackthorn Security Company, and Miss Daly arrived in about 10 minutes. We're meeting too frequently. Is this your way of deliberately getting close to me? Hobert smiled. Madam, I have no plans for romance right now. What an unappreciative young man, Miss Daly smiled. Tell me, what do you need me for this time? Hobert got straight to the point. I'd like to ask you to send my client to the poorhouse of the Church of the Night. Miss Daly frowned. That's not within my scope of duties. Is it not within your scope of duties to help the goddess's believers overcome the difficulties they encounter? All right, I'm actually trying to argue with a lawyer. Miss Daly asked, "What's so special about him?" "Madam, Backland is full of ordinary people." "Then what's your reason for sympathizing with him?" "It's not what you imagine," Hobert said. "I'm sending him to the poorhouse simply because I need him to survive." He laughed self-deprecatingly. "I have my own purpose." "Oh." Miss Daly tilted her head and looked at Hobert. "Really?" The two chatted for a few moments, then walked together to the bar's entrance. Hobert handed Bob over to Miss Daly. After Hobert got into his carriage and left, Miss Daly asked Bob, "Tell me about your experience." "Ah. Yes, madam. Back at the law firm, Hobert began preparing documents to submit to the formal court. Next was to wait for the court to accept the case and announce the trial date. After finishing all this, Hobert stretched, finally having some leisure time. He looked out the window, contemplating what delicacies to buy to reward himself after work. Time spent slacking always flew by. After work, Hobert bought some pumpkin bread and sweets, rewarding himself for his performance in the magistrate's court today. After a pleasant dinner, Christine called Hobert into the study. "I've already had Dofus contact Jacob Otto." Before this, Dofus had already investigated, and what Jacob and his team found is indeed a fourth epic ruin. Hobert paused for a moment before recalling that Jacob was the one who claimed to have discovered a fourth epic ruin and had twice formed a team at the mercenary club gatherings. The second time he formed a team, Hobert had even helped him convey his wish to ask Brigadier General Christine for help. And Dofus was Christine's personal valet, famously incompetent, yet Christine always kept him by her side. Hobert had long suspected he might be a Beander. Since Christine would send him to do preliminary investigations and contact Jacob, he must be a Beander loyal to Christine. Christine said, "Tomorrow, Dofus will officially join Jacob's team. You go with him as well, and show your face there often in the future. By the end, you'll also be qualified to share in the gains from the ruin." "There's such a good thing." Hobert nodded. "All right." He, of course, knew that this was not Jacob's generosity, it was a benefit earned through the influence of a brigadier general. Christine took a deep breath and continued, "After Rex returned from the South Continent, he did explore some ancient ruins, but I only accompanied him to explore two of them, not including the one Jacob's team found. Perhaps we can find his relics in the ruin." Hobert didn't feel much about this, as he was quite unfamiliar with this biological father. After the brief conversation, Hobert left the study and went to ask Dofus about the departure time for tomorrow. Finally, he wrote a leave note for Barton, asking the coachman to deliver it to the law firm tomorrow. The next morning, Hobert and Dofus rode a carriage together to the northern suburbs of Backland. Dofus was about the same age as Christine, with distinct South Continent features in his skin and hair color. He had a cold, taciturn demeanor, more like a bodyguard than a personal valet. Hobert tried to initiate a few topics, but received no response from Dofus. He lost the desire to chat and stared blankly out the carriage window at the scenery. After leaving the urban area of Backland, the carriage traveled for another hour before arriving at the ruin excavation site. The characteristic smog of Backland was gone here, the sun was much brighter, and there was no pungent odor in the air. Jacob's team's camp was set up at the foot of a mountain. It wasn't a stealthy excavation like Hobert had imagined, similar to grave robbing, but rather a large-scale excavation of the ruin, with dozens of tents alone. It was evident that Jacob had hired many ordinary people who were engaged in excavation work such as moving soil and cleaning antiques. Jacob had already received the news and was waiting at the camp entrance to greet Dofus and Hobert. "Mr. Hobert, thank you for facilitating our cooperation with General Christine," Jacob said politely while shaking Hobert's hand. Hobert smiled. "It was your sincerity that moved my father." He asked, "Won't the local government obstruct your actions?" "We have legitimate archaeological excavation documents," Jacob said. "A few years ago, Mateen protected an archaeological team and formed a deep friendship with them." Then Jacob led Hobert and Dofus on a brief tour of the camp, then took them to the excavation site behind the camp. The fourth epic ruin was buried underground, and the workers had already cleared a very wide entrance. The group entered a magnificent-looking building. On the inner wall of the building was a line of text: "Do not make eye contact with rabbits. When in danger, closing your eyes is more important than fleeing." The inscription was, "Rex Heller. This book will be available in a few days. The author asks for your first subscription now." The first subscription is crucial for a book. Even if the author is somewhat laid back, your support with the first subscription is needed. The entrance to the ruins was like an underground street, with what appeared to be residences and shops on both sides. For some unknown reason, this complex of buildings was not covered by earth and was preserved remarkably well, as if a giant bubble had formed underground. Looking up, one could clearly see the earth and rocks above, with some tree roots even reaching down. Such well-preserved ruins usually unearth many valuable antiques. Even if no extraordinary items were found within the ruins, Jacob's team could still make a substantial profit just by selling the antiques. This was also why Jacob was so keen on Christine joining. This kind of business, with low cost and high returns, could easily make some people envious. Christine's involvement provided them with sufficient protection. Even if Christine had never visited the excavation site, Jacob would still give the general a satisfactory share of the profits. The building where Rex left his message was the largest structure in this complex, seemingly a noble's residence. Hobert pointed to the message on the wall: "Why can't you make eye contact with a rabbit?" "We don't know either," Jacob said with a wry smile, "but many rabbit holes have indeed been found in the ruins. However, we haven't discovered anything unusual about the rabbits here yet." Hobert asked again, "I remember you saying that 2 team members have already died, correct?" "Yes, they died while exploring the underground part of this building. We originally thought their deaths were caused by Beander creatures." At this point, Jacob explained, "Some Beander creatures love to use these ancient ruins as their habitats." He continued, "But when we attempted to commune with their spirits, we found that their spiritual bodies seemed incomplete, making effective communication impossible. That's when I realized the situation might be spiraling beyond our control." Hobert nodded and followed Jacob to the underground section. Surprisingly, the underground area was incredibly spacious, seemingly even larger than the above-ground portion. A crest-like pattern appeared on the wall, a black crown. Hobert speculated, "This looks like the Trensust family crest." "You are truly a learned gentleman," Jacob complimented. "I consulted experts on this matter, and it is indeed the emblem of Trensust." He shook his head and chuckled, "But the professors can't understand why a Trensust family ruin would appear in northern Backland. This family's tombs and ruins are mostly found in the Kingdom of Fenaport and the Intis Republic. The prevailing modern view is that this Knight Emperor's family should have originated in the western part of the North Continent. Backland was not the primary area of activity for the Trensust family. Even if the ruins here truly belong to the Trensust family, they shouldn't have left behind any high-level magical items." Hobert was momentarily stunned. He had forgotten that these declining Beander families had long been buried in the dust of history. Few people now knew that Trensust and Tudor had once served Black Emperor Solomon together, and that they had a brief period of joint rule. Later, under pressure from Solomon's return, Trensust proactively sought help from the Six Gods. With the assistance of the Six Gods, he successfully advanced to Sequence 0 Judge, and only then did the joint government split into 2. Before the establishment of the Terenzost Empire, most of the Knight Emperor's family members should have been in Backland. After walking for about a few minutes, the group stopped at a fork in the path. Jacob said, "Further ahead lies unknown danger. Now, Mr. Doffus, please lead us in the exploration." Doffus nodded. Hobert looked at the corridor, which led to an unknown destination, flickering between light and shadow under the torchlight, as if some monster was lurking in the nearby darkness, observing everyone. He reminded Doffus, "Perhaps the relationship between the Tudor family and the Trensust family is closer than we imagined, or perhaps the Trensust family's power in Backland during the Fourth Epoch exceeded our imagination." Doffus didn't care if Hobert understood. He said coldly, "They are both Beander families from the lawyer pathway. Perhaps it was an alliance formed due to some external pressure." Hobert said, I remember the Ruined Kingdom and the Fenaport Kingdom were allies for a period, weren't they? Dofus gave Hobert a deep look. He hadn't expected Hobert to understand the meaning of his words just now. Moreover, Hobert had even reminded him that for governing Beander families like lawyer, arbitrator, and hunter, besides the hostile relationship of Beander sequences, there are sometimes political considerations. For example, conflicts between secular governing power and divine power, mutual checks and balances between divine powers, and so on. These factors could all cause governing Beander families to make seemingly illogical moves. Dofus hummed, indicating that he understood Hobert's meaning. Jacob, who was standing nearby, was completely bewildered by their subtle exchange. Although he was quite learned, Jacob could sense that this conversation contained very advanced knowledge, but he couldn't grasp its specific meaning. Everyone returned to the camp. It was already lunchtime. Hobert planned to take a carriage back to Backland after lunch. Lunch at the camp was simple, but with wild vegetables and wild rabbit meat, it had a unique flavor. After Hobert finished eating and was admiring the beautiful scenery around him, Jacob approached with a man in his 30s, Mr. Hobert, I heard you are an undefeated lawyer. Are you interested in taking on a criminal case? Hobert thought to himself, if it were last week, I would definitely not be interested, but this week I am interested because I just obtained my lawyer's license. As for Jacob complimenting him as undefeated, that was true, because so far Hobert had only fought 3 lawsuits. One was a practice case given to him by Barton that he was sure to win. One was Sean's case where he found loopholes in relevant laws, and only Bob's case was quite difficult. He wondered what Jacob would think after knowing his track record. Hobert politely said, "You flatter me. Let me hear about the case first." Jacob introduced the man in his 30s behind him. His name is Dalen, a foreman among the workers. He has encountered legal troubles and wishes to request your help. Hobert invited Dalen to sit opposite him. After a brief inquiry, Hobert learned that Dalen was seeking a lawyer's help for a friend of his. More than half a month ago, Dalen's friend, Bill, was navigating a small boat on the Tassoc River when he collided with another boat. Because Bill was intoxicated at the time, the owner of the other boat sued him for drunk driving. Hobert was very happy. Of course, not happy about Bill's boat collision, but happy that the opportunity to completely digest the potion had arrived. Hobert concealed his emotions and said, "I feel sorry for what happened to your friend, but I still have to tell you that he needs a lawyer to defend him, otherwise, besides paying money, he will also face a prison sentence." "Oh, storms above," Dalen said excitedly, "Bill's driving skills are best after he drinks. It's that hateful tobacco merchant, he doesn't understand the rules of navigation on the river at all. That damned profiteer, no one was injured, yet he insists on sending Bill to prison." Hobert waited quietly for the other party to vent his emotions before saying, "If you want me to defend your friend Bill, please have Bill's family bring the lawsuit and relevant materials to the law firm to find me tomorrow or Saturday." Then Dalen asked a question that almost every client asks, "Can this lawsuit be won?" "I need to see the plaintiff's lawsuit before I can give you a specific answer," Hobert replied while taking out paper and pen from his briefcase and writing down the address of the law firm. Dalen put away the address, thanked Hobert and Jacob, and then left in a hurry. Hobert also bid farewell to Jacob, promising to visit again in a few days. It was already past 3 in the afternoon when he returned to the law firm by carriage. Hobert took out the 3rd case Barton gave him and started studying it again. This case was not urgent, so Hobert put it last. In fact, Hobert had already read these materials several times, but he just wanted to sit quietly until work ended, and he always had to look busy. Hobert. While Hobert was slacking off, a colleague said to him, "A client specifically requested you to defend the party." Hobert was stunned. "Me? When did I become so famous?" "Yes," the colleague reminded him, "when I came in just now, I heard a few words. It's a plea of not guilty, and it seems quite complicated. If you are not confident, just refuse." "Thank you." Hobert got up and went to the reception room. As soon as he entered, he saw a woman in her 40s or 50s sitting on a chair. She was well dressed and wore some jewelry, but she looked a bit anxious. Behind this lady stood a middle-aged man who looked somewhat familiar and a strange young man, who should be the butler and a servant. The butler saw Hobert enter and immediately smiled. "Lawyer Hobert, we meet again." Hobert then remembered that this was Mr. Barton's butler. "Yes, Mr. Butler, we meet again. Is Mr. Barton doing well?" He finally knew why this lady specifically asked for him. It turned out she was introduced by Barton. "Very well," the butler said. "A few days ago, the master bought another horse, and I often hear his hearty laughter." Hobert smiled and nodded. The lady sitting on the chair asked with some unease, "Is this Lawyer Hobert?" He was much younger than she imagined. Was it really okay to hire him? "Yes, madam," the butler introduced. "This is Mrs. Kent, Mr. Barton's aunt. She has some legal issues and hopes to get your help." Hobert sat opposite Mrs. Kent and began to understand the case. Mrs. Kent had an only son, Bruce Kent. Bruce divorced last year, and he had always resented his former in-laws, always feeling that his in-laws, who despised the poor and loved the rich, had ruined his marriage. So, not long ago, Bruce bought some gunpowder from the black market, made it into the shape of a bomb, and threw it into his father-in-law's yard. The father-in-law's family was quite frightened. After they reported it to the police, the prosecution charged Bruce with bombing and intentional homicide and brought him to court. Coincidentally, Mrs. Kent, who had already lost her husband, had gone traveling with friends some time ago, and when she returned, she was informed that Bruce's case would go to trial this Saturday, which was the day after tomorrow. Mrs. Kent quickly asked relatives and friends for help, and Mr. Barton recommended the conscientious and responsible lawyer Hobert to his aunt. After understanding the general situation, Hobert asked Mrs. Kent, "Are you sure Mr. Bruce did not light the fuse when he threw the homemade bomb?" "I'm sure," Mrs. Kent said. "I visited poor little Bruce in prison, and he said it was just a prank. The fuse he made was glued to the outside of the bomb, and even if it was lit, it couldn't detonate the gunpowder." Hobert nodded. "Did you bring a copy of the plaintiff's lawsuit?" "I brought it." While Hobert was reading the lawsuit, Mrs. Kent said angrily and anxiously, "The Wyant family, Bruce's former in-laws, are a bunch of scoundrels. When little Bruce was dating Wyant's daughter, I warned him that Wyant had no money but liked to look down on people, and that such a marriage should be approached with caution. Later, it turned out exactly as I said. Oh, goddess. That hateful Wyant not only ruined my son's family, but now he wants to send my son to prison. How can there be such a scoundrel? You don't need to be angry, madam. It is our lawyers' value to seek justice for our clients," Hobert said with a smile. "I have just read the plaintiff's lawsuit, and I am quite confident in this defense. May I ask if you entrust me to defend your son?" "Of course, Lawyer Hobert. The moment I saw you, I knew that only a young and promising lawyer like you could save my poor little Bruce," Mrs. Kent said sincerely. Hobert thought to himself, "Madam, you clearly looked distrustful of me just now. Was it after seeing the confidence I displayed that you changed your mind?" "Then please, madam, sign the power of attorney," Hobert said. "I need to keep the plaintiff's lawsuit to study it further." After seeing off Mrs. Kent and her party, Hobert realized that his previous practice of diligently handling every commission had paid off. The cases he received this week, except for Dalen's, were all introduced by acquaintances. This indicated that his previous commissions had allowed him to accumulate a certain network of contacts, which meant he could now establish a firm footing in the legal profession. If he continued to maintain the standard of diligently handling every commission, these connections would become increasingly extensive. Hobert took his first innocent plea defense very seriously. In addition to consulting relevant materials, he also went to Minsk prison the next day, which was Friday morning, to understand the details of the bomb from Bruce. After making thorough preparations, Hobert arrived at the Backland court early on Saturday. This was one of the 3 official courts in Backland, primarily handling criminal cases involving ordinary citizens. The official court was much more spacious than the magistrate's court. The judge's bench was set on a high platform, looking very imposing. In addition, there were court police responsible for maintaining order, giving an invisible pressure. The spectator area was also very large, estimated to seat 200 to 300 people. Besides Mrs. Kent, Mr. Barton, and others, there were also Bruce's friends, totaling 20 to 30 people, attending the hearing. There were also relatives and friends of the plaintiff, the Wyant family. The two sides sat in different positions, occasionally glaring at each other. Furs also arrived on time. This time, she brought a notebook, ready to record some details of Hobert's defense. This is an extra chapter for everyone's monthly votes. In the past month and early this month, everyone cast many monthly votes for the author. This extra chapter is to show my gratitude. Around 9 a.m., with a 27 or 28-year-old young judge sitting on the judge's bench, the Bruce murder case officially opened. Hobert felt the pressure from the judge, and he suspected that this judge was a true judge, and he came to court to play the role. The prosecutor spoke first, stating Bruce's crimes. The defendant threw approximately 8 pounds of explosives into Mr. Wyant's yard. Before the trial, I consulted professionals, and 8 pounds of gunpowder is enough to blow up Mr. Wyant's house, causing his family to suffer a devastating disaster in their sleep. In addition, the huge explosion could also affect Mr. Wyant's neighbors, causing them varying degrees of injury, and even trigger a fire, leading to more casualties. Your Honor, our side believes that the defendant's actions severely affected the personal and property safety of dozens of citizens, which is a typical case of bombing and intentional homicide. Our statement concludes. The judge said, "Now, please, defense counsel, make your statement." Hobert, wearing a black lawyer's robe and a wig, stood up and said, "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, I truly did not expect the prosecutor to make such an absurd assertion." As soon as these words came out, the relatives of the Wyant family in the audience immediately became restless, and some even cursed in low voices. The judge said to Hobert, "Defense counsel, please mind your language." "Your Honor, what I said is the truth." Hobert said, "The evidence provided by the prosecution is on the table in front of you, and I believe the prosecution has confirmed that the fuse was simply twisted from paper, making it difficult to burn to the bomb even if lit, and the fuse was not connected to the gunpowder but merely glued to the outside of the bomb. Ladies and gentlemen, can such a bomb be detonated? Even if these explosives were more powerful, this bomb would not explode at all. The key is that Bruce did not light the fuse at all, meaning he did not subjectively commit a specific criminal act, nor did he use these explosives as a bomb. I need to remind the prosecutor that the crime of bombing belongs to concrete dangerous crimes. Unless the plaintiff provides evidence to prove that this bomb would definitely be detonated, or that Bruce had a subjective act of detonation, otherwise the prosecutor's accusation is not specific enough, and the crime of bombing is not established. Since the crime of bombing is not established, intentional homicide is also not established. Therefore, I believe the prosecutor's assertion is very absurd. The audience immediately erupted with curses from Wyant's family and friends, as well as jeers and cheers from Bruce's friends and family. The judge lightly tapped the gavel. Silence. Defense counsel, do you have anything else to say? After everyone quieted down, Hobert said, "Your Honor, our statement concludes." Then it was the prosecutor's turn to speak. He continued to describe the dangers of explosives and their instability, still arguing that these explosives posed a threat to the personal and property safety of the Wyant family. When it was Hobert's turn to speak, he smiled and said, "Your Honor, prosecutor, should we conduct an investigative experiment and throw this piece of evidence at me to see if I will be blown to death?" Hobert firmly grasped the loophole in the definition of the crime of bombing, forcing the prosecutor to change his strategy. "Your Honor, it is very likely that the defendant committed a crime of passion, which is why he did not properly handle the bomb's fuse. However, the moment the defendant threw the bomb into Mr. Wyant's yard, he had already committed the crime of intentional injury. This was abandoning the prosecution for the crime of bombing and instead holding firm to the defense line of intentional homicide. Prosecution, let's consider this scenario." Hobert said, If I shouted at you, "I'm going to kill you," and then threw an unloaded pistol at you, would you also consider that intentional homicide? Bruce may have grievances against the Wyant family, but he did not take effective action. Ladies and gentlemen, since when does having resentment towards someone warrant a prison sentence of 20 years or more? If intentional homicide is established, Bruce would face at least 20 years to life imprisonment. Hobert questioned the prosecutor, "Are you trying to strip people of their right to have emotions? Even demons and evil gods are not so cruel, why do you want to do this?" Hobert's brilliant thought experiment in defense drew applause and cheers from the audience. The prosecutor gradually struggled to resist Hobert's offensive defense counsel, "Please do not quibble." The defendant resented the Wyant family and threw a bomb at them. The causal relationship is established, and this is an undeniable fact. Does defense counsel believe that someone throwing a bomb into your home is not a crime? Guilty, of course guilty. Hobert said. Everyone was somewhat surprised by this answer, and there were even a few gasps. However, Hobert continued, Bruce's crime is the purchase and possession of dangerous goods, which, according to relevant laws, should be punished with a fine of £10 to £30, and detention for 15 days to 3 months. As for throwing a bomb at the Wyant family, that is purely a baseless false accusation. That cannot be called a bomb at all, and Bruce had no intention to kill at all, and did not constitute intentional homicide. At this point in the trial, Hobert's plea of not guilty was basically successful, and in the subsequent defense, the prosecutor found it difficult to launch an effective offensive. In the audience, the faces of Bruce's relatives and friends gradually showed smiles, while the expressions of Wyant's family and friends gradually became serious. During the final statement, Hobert said, Your Honor, this case seems to be a debate about a bomb that resembles a model, but in reality, it represents that the fault tolerance of Backland's citizens is becoming increasingly low. If my client is truly imprisoned for a prank, the open and inclusive spirit of the ruined kingdom will be severely impacted. The judge was moved by these words. Finally, it was the judge's turn to pronounce the verdict. The prosecutor did not provide sufficient evidence to prove the defendant's intent to kill, and no definitive conclusion of concrete dangerous crime was formed. This court rules that the prosecutor's 2 claims of bombing and intentional homicide are not established. However, because the defendant purchased and possessed dangerous goods, and the circumstances were serious, with a tendency to harm others, he is fined £30 and detained for 3 months. Bruce's family and friends all breathed a sigh of relief. A £30 fine was not much for them, and 3 months was not long. This verdict was much better than being convicted of intentional homicide. Wyant, in the plaintiff's seat, was not satisfied with the result and loudly shouted that he would appeal. The judge ignored Wyant, gathered his documents, and unhurriedly left the judge's bench. At this moment, Hobert was in a very peculiar state. The judge's pronouncement just now seemed to be constantly providing feedback on Hobert's use of the legal provisions and his use of loopholes in the plaintiff's claims. Upon completing the pronouncement, Hobert seemed to hear a sudden illusory shattering sound in his ear. At this moment, he felt that his flesh and spirituality had both been sublimated. The lawyer potion was completely digested. The digestion of the potion was smoother than Hobert's plan, thanks to the connections he accumulated by diligently handling every commission. If he continued to handle the cases Mr. Barton assigned him, it would take at least another 2 or 3 weeks for the potion to be completely digested. Mr. Bob's case, introduced by Robin's cousin, Miss Hughes' introduction of Mr. Sean's case, and Mr. Bruce's case, introduced by Mr. Barton. These 3 cases helped Hobert digest the remaining potion in his body, and all 3 cases were the result of his own accumulated connections, which was what pleased Hobert the most. Thank you, Hobert. Bruce's sincere thanks brought Hobert back to his senses. He smiled and said, Your future happiness will be the greatest mockery of your past life. Your family background is good, and you are still young. I believe it won't be difficult to achieve this. Don't do anything foolish again. Your advice is my wish. After Bruce said a few more words to his mother, he followed the bailiff to prison to serve his sentence. Although they won the lawsuit, Kent was still in tears, as Bruce would have to stay in a cold prison for 3 months. Hobert chatted with Mr. Barton for a few moments, and then they all left one after another. Outside the courthouse, Hobert was about to get into a hansom cab when Furs approached and said, "We're going the same way, let's go together." Car sharing. No problem. Although he was already very wealthy, Hobert, always trying to save a little where he could, naturally wouldn't refuse. Inside the carriage, Furs suddenly said, "Hobert, do you think Bruce's punishment is a bit inappropriate?" I don't mean anything else." Furs said, "I also don't think Bruce's behavior should be considered intentional murder or intentional harm, but he does have a tendency to harm others." "I understand what you mean." Hobert smiled and said, "This is actually a common problem for non-legal professionals. They always like to use moral judgment to determine the standard for a person's punishment." Furs paused, as if that were the case. "Miss Furs, you should know that people's moral standards have never been completely unified, so judgments made with morality are also difficult to unify." Hobert said, "Just like Bruce's case, the Wyant family believes he should stay in prison for 20 years, which is clearly unreasonable. Bruce's mother believes her son should be acquitted in court, which is also unreasonable. Have you noticed? Most of the time, the law is a compromise option. At the same time, the credibility of the law, and its violent enforcement methods, allow most people to abandon their own moral judgments and accept the law's judgment. This is the value of the judicial system." Furs smiled and said, "My perspective on the problem was too naive. No, this is my profession." Hobert said, "Just as I don't understand writing books or practicing medicine, everyone has something they are good at." Furs nodded, feeling that Hobert's explanation of the law just now had greatly benefited her, and the image of the protagonist in her mind became clearer. Back at the law firm, Hobert's mind was no longer on work. Since the potion had been completely digested, he naturally wanted to advance as soon as possible. He had known for a long time that the Sequence 8 potion was called Barbarian, Apton, Rex, Hobert, K. Use, Sequence, Dalen, Bill, Robin, Sewell, Extraordinary, Ruin, Bob. Hobert had almost forgotten about the curse on him. According to the information left by Rex, the original owner's biological father, the Mad Whispers would return half a year after each promotion, making the Heller family members more prone to madness and loss of control. So the optimal choice was to wait a period of time, and only consume the Sequence 8 potion when it was almost half a year. This way, Hobert would have more time to find the Sequence 7 formula and main ingredients. However, after Hobert became a lawyer, he trapped the Mad Whispers in the pond in front of the Iron Throne. Half a year later, those Mad Whispers might no longer affect Hobert. That's why he wanted to advance immediately and increase his strength. Once he reached Sequence 7 and gained many practical extraordinary abilities, it wouldn't be too late to slow down his advancement speed. "My current strength is too weak," Hobert said. "There's no way for me to investigate the family's curse, so I need to improve my strength as quickly as possible." Christine sighed, "I respect your choice, but after you've fully digested your Sequence 8 potion, don't rush to advance. I will tell you some secrets of the Heller family, and then you will face new choices." Hobert nodded, "I will." Christine said no more. He opened the drawer, took out the safe key, first retrieved a roll of parchment from the safe, and then took out 2 extraordinary materials. Spreading the parchment on the square cabinet, Christine then took out beakers, measuring cylinders, scales, and other tools from the cabinet, as well as several auxiliary materials. Hobert leaned over and glanced at the parchment. It was the Barbarian potion formula. Main ingredients: 1 kk frenzied grass, 1 solid horn crystal of an earth rhinoceros. Auxiliary ingredients: 1 deep-veined walnut, 1 lemon balm plant, 10 ml of hydrosol extracted from poplar bark, 100 ml of strong liquor. Alcohol again. After seeing the potion formula, Hobert first thought, is it possible that all the auxiliary materials for the Black Emperor pathway potion formulas include alcohol? Christine began to concoct the potion according to the formula, first adding the walnut with black veins and the lemon balm with a rich floral scent, followed by the hydrosol and strong liquor. The 4 auxiliary materials were added to the container, but no reaction occurred. When a palm-sized clump of green grass was added, a sizzling sound began to emanate from the container. Both the deep-veined walnut and the lemon balm melted to varying degrees. That palm-sized clump of green grass was an entire frenzied grass plant. Although it was unknown when it had been dug up, it still had vitality, and before being placed in the container, it seemed to be baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Finally, there was the earth rhinoceros's horn crystal. It looked like a small piece of black crystal, beautiful like a cat's eye gem under the light. When the horn crystal was also placed in the container, a small puff of black smoke immediately emerged. All solid materials instantly melted, bubbling and gurgling without any heating. A few seconds later, the bubbles disappeared, and the potion in the container turned into a deep red liquid that occasionally flickered with red starlight. The liquid was poured into a pre-prepared cup, leaving no residue in the container. Hobert took the cup, looked at the liquid inside, and laughed. I didn't expect it to look so disgusting. I should have skipped dinner. After a brief complaint about the potion, Hobert tilted his head back and drank it in one gulp. Before he could even taste it, the warm potion slid down his throat into his stomach. As soon as Hobert put down the cup, his entire body immediately stiffened. Then, waves of intense pain assailed him, as if every muscle and every bone in his body was being reforged by an invisible iron hammer. Consuming the lawyer potion did not cause much discomfort, but the barbarian potion was different. It seemed to be completely transforming Hobert's body. After the intense pain, there was a bursting palpitation, as if his heart was about to leap out of his chest. The series of intense discomforts made Hobert slump into the chair. He buried his head deeply, silently enduring it all. It took about 1 or 2 minutes for the palpitations and discomfort to gradually disappear. Hobert let out a long sigh of relief. Christine, who was standing by, asked, "How was it? Did you feel the pain of advancing?" Hobert took a deep breath before asking, "Are the discomforts of Sequence 7 and Sequence 6 even worse than this?" Middle sequence potions are primarily a mental impact, not a physical one, Christine said. So even if the Sequence 8 potion is completely digested, you'll need to prepare for a while longer before attempting to advance. Hobert nodded, "I understand." Christine poured himself a glass of strong liquor. "Feel your new abilities." Hobert spread his spirituality, gaining an understanding of the barbarian's abilities. Firstly, his spiritual power had significantly increased. If facing ordinary people, it would be easy to distort their thoughts. Even when facing low-sequence beyonders, he could achieve a certain degree of distortion that clearly went against their intentions. Moreover, he could resist most low-sequence mental attacks and had some resistance to middle-sequence mental attacks. Additionally, his ability to summarize patterns and find loopholes was significantly enhanced. Besides these changes to the abilities already possessed by a lawyer, the barbarian potion also granted Hobert a new ability, frenzied state. And it was a frenzied state, where all rationality could be maintained. Currently, Hobert could sustain the frenzied state for over 10 minutes, and as the potion was digested, the duration of the frenzied state would increase. In the frenzied state, Hobert would erupt with astonishing strength, and his physique would be correspondingly enhanced. He felt as if he could move objects 3 times his own weight, like an ant. Such astonishing strength, used in combat, was even more ferocious than a warrior. Unfortunately, Hobert discovered a shortcoming of the barbarian. During his fight with Apton, his speed was a bit lacking. However, the fighting ring on Hobert's hand could effectively circumvent this shortcoming. After the frenzied state ended, Hobert would not experience any discomfort or weakening of strength. He would simply need to wait for his spirituality to recover for a period before entering the next frenzied state. The barbarian potion primarily focused on physical enhancement, granting Hobert combat power far exceeding that of ordinary people. As for extraordinary abilities, they were mainly manifested in distorted language. After understanding his own state, a new question appeared before Hobert: how should a barbarian be role-played? Should he go to the rainforests of the South Continent and live with the local barbarians for a while? From a well-dressed lawyer to a barbarian, that's quite a leap. And what do lawyer and barbarian have in common? Christine replied, this requires you to experience it yourself. You must remember that acting is an important experience for a Beander. Others' opinions are for reference only, and you must form your own understanding of the potion and Beander abilities. Hobert left the study with a heavy heart, returned to his bedroom, first thought about Christine's words, and then eagerly entered the country of disorder. As soon as Hobert entered the country of disorder, he immediately felt the difference. His spirituality seemed to be able to support him in the country of disorder for 1 or 2 hours. He could also use the sacrificial gate to grab some items that did not possess too strong spirituality, and he could handle 2 to 3 sacrifices at once. However, such a situation should be impossible to encounter. After all, he now only had 1 believer, 2 if he included himself. Then Hobert discovered that the blurry figure trapped in the pool had become clearer. It could be seen that the other party was a young male. This surprised Hobert. After controlling the blurry figure in the pool, the problem of the curse was not solved. As Hobert grew stronger, this figure also seemed to become more substantial and stronger. Hobert was really afraid that one day the figure in the pool would climb up and sit on the Iron Throne, and from then on, the country of disorder would change hands. Fortunately, after Hobert's advancement, his control over the country of disorder increased, and currently, the blurry figure showed no signs of breaking free from control. He still needed to investigate the family curse as soon as possible. Hobert thought, this curse is a ticking time bomb. Calming himself down, Hobert extended his spirituality and found that the entire mountain where the Iron Throne was located was under his control. At the mountainside, there was a small forest. Before it was within Hobert's control, this forest seemed to have nothing special about it. But now, Hobert's spirituality sensed the unusual nature of those trees. Hobert got up and, with just 1 step, arrived in front of the trees. These trees seemed to remain unchanged no matter how time flowed. Hobert reached out, and a branch appeared in his hand. His spirituality immediately sensed the branch's ability. This was actually a one-time magical item. First, you need to set the activation spell in advance. When using it, pour spiritual power into it and shout the spell, then insert the branch into the ground, and the branch will immediately grow into a large tree. The holder can manipulate the order under the canopy, making the order in this area beneficial to the holder and disadvantageous to the opponent. At the same time, the holder can also distort the opponent's attack target and the target of their extraordinary abilities. The entire large tree will exist for 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, the large tree will quickly wither and eventually turn into an ordinary branch. As Hobert advances, the existence time and range of the large tree will gradually increase. When the large tree withers, another branch will grow on a certain tree in the country of disorder. The power of order in the source material neither increases nor decreases. If the country of disorder is fully controlled, the branches here will be recyclable magical items. However, before that, if a branch is used outside, there is only a very small probability that it will regrow in the forest on the mountainside, meaning it's a one-and-done situation. But this was also good, it gave Hobert an extra trump card. Hobert looked at the branch in his hand. How could he take it out and use it? He couldn't just carry a branch everywhere, could he? Did he have to carry a branch to court for a defense? The thought of that scene made him feel like he was mentally unstable, and when fighting an enemy, the enemy would definitely notice the branch first and take precautions. Hobert was thoughtful. After some attempts, the appearance of the branch in his hand could indeed change. Finally, Hobert transformed it into processed ebony. After leaving the country of disorder, he could try to install the metal head of his staff onto the transformed branch. Sitting back on the Iron Throne, Hobert named the branch in his hand, Order Wood, and the activation spell was, Order. In a moment, he was ready to take the Order Wood in his hand out by means of bestowal. Looking at the scattered sky of the country of disorder, Hobert suddenly had the idea of building a grand hall here. Otherwise, it would be quite undignified for the dignified, the creator, to work in the wilderness. So, a huge hall rose from the ground, and the iron throne was placed on a high platform within the hall, making Hobert appear exceptionally tall. The pool in front of the iron throne was like a pool between an ancient emperor and his ministers, increasing Hobert's sense of mystery and distance. When the huge hall was about to cross the pool, it stopped abruptly. Hobert sighed. With his current ability over the country of disorder, he could only build this far. Thus, the creator's palace was unfinished and could only continue to be built after advancing to sequence 7. Fortunately, there was no one else here, so Hobert wouldn't feel embarrassed. Finally, Hobert discovered that his true sight projected through the stars had increased several times. Previously, he could only see the situations around Elliot and Raft, but now it could extend 7 or 8 meters. After understanding the changes in the country of disorder, Hobert obtained the Order Wood by means of bestowal. He felt his spirituality was about to be depleted and quickly entered a state of meditation to recover his spirituality. In the first few days of taking the potion, spiritual depletion was a very dangerous thing. On Sunday, Hobert slept in. After feeling that his physical strength and spirituality were very abundant, he went to the tool room to get some carpentry tools, disassembled the metal head of his staff, and then carefully installed it onto the Order Wood. Finally, he sanded it down to remove any traces left during installation. Hobert held the staff in his hand and looked at it. His craftsmanship was quite good, there was no sign that it had been modified. After lunch, Hobert took the family carriage to the mercenary club to attend the Beander gathering. As he had predicted last week, there were still many mercenaries selling magical items at this week's gathering. This time, their harvest was considerable, and they would be the main characters at the gathering for the next few weeks. While he was lost in thought, a mercenary stood up, selling a magical item. As he spoke, he took out a small section of a candle that looked like it was wrapped in human skin. The wick was about a knuckle high, completely black, with fine, dense, scale-like patterns. Hobert immediately sat up straight. The other party introduced, "This candle can help you enter the opponent's spiritual world, which is very suitable for interrogation, but it is best not to use it for too long, because the holder can easily get lost in the spiritual world." Hobert stared intently at that small section of candle. It was really a Heartmare candle. Sequence 8, Time to Cause Trouble. The mercenary club obviously hadn't thoroughly researched the use of the Heartmare candle. Entering an opponent's spiritual world was only one of the candle's abilities, its more important abilities were to pull the opponent into the deepest level of the dream and to split personalities. The mercenary club quoted, £900. This was an excellent opportunity to find a bargain, and Hobert immediately stood up and said, "I'll take it." He dared to say that among so many people attending the gathering, only he was aware of all the abilities and negative effects of this small section of candle. From its appearance, the Heartmare candle didn't seem particularly special. A magical item that could enter an enemy's spiritual world was probably worth around £1,000. However, if the Heartmare candle only possessed this one ability, then selling it for £900 to £950, given its negative effects, would be very reasonable. If all of its abilities were known, the price of the Heartmare candle could immediately quadruple or quintuple. This was just the base price. Such a magical item, almost on par with a Sequence 6, would certainly have a premium. This was the advantage of having a god's eye view. Many participants at the gathering also saw that this candle seemed to be more than just entering an opponent's spiritual world, but they wouldn't gamble on whether this candle truly had more abilities. Many magical items had been offered at the gatherings in recent weeks, and they would use their money to purchase items they were more confident about. Only Hobert knew the specifics of the Heartmare candle. He absolutely had to seize this bargain. The Beander gathering at the Mercenary Club had clear regulations. If authentication and notarization were requested, a certain notarization fee had to be paid for it to be notarized. Whoever proposed notarization had to pay approximately 10% of the transaction amount, so generally, no one would request notarization. Of course, even without notarization, malicious fraudulent transactions would certainly be punished. Hobert's action could only be considered finding a bargain and did not violate any relevant regulations. However, another officer also took an interest in this candle. He stood up and said, "I'll offer £950. Hobert immediately followed, £960. £1,000. £10. That officer spread his hands. "All right, it's yours." This officer had a magical item and recognized the unusual nature of this candle, but £1,000 was his bottom line. As mentioned earlier, there were many more enticing magical items today. This time, Hobert didn't feel pained and immediately paid £10. His savings once again became insufficient to fill his wallet. However, once he resold it, his wallet would be overflowing again. Of course, he didn't plan to sell it. A larger plan was forming in his mind. This gathering was unusually long, with a large number of transactions completed, and it didn't end until around 4 in the afternoon. After leaving the underground theater, Hobert first wrote a letter to Dai Li, arranging to meet her tomorrow. Then, he rushed home without stopping to rest, only feeling at ease after placing the Heartmare candle at home. Without time to catch his breath, he took the family's two-wheeled carriage and went to the Harvest Church on Rose Street in the South Bridge district. This golden church had a conspicuous spire and a holy symbol of life carved on its exterior wall. The symbol was a simple drawing of a baby surrounded by symbols like wheat ears, flowers, and springs. It was already dusk, and the church lights were dim, with seemingly few congregants. Hobert stepped into the church and saw rows of neatly arranged seats, with lit candles on both sides. On the frontmost seat was a tall man in his 40s or 50s, wearing a brown clerical robe. The man had light and sparse eyebrows, with noticeable wrinkles around his eyes, cheeks, and mouth. He was currently bowing his head, seemingly engaged in the most devout confession. Hobert approached step by step. "Hello, Bishop Utravsky. You know me." The bishop raised his head. "I prefer people to call me Father, Father Utravsky." "Understood, Mr. Bishop," Hobert said. "I am Hobert, a lawyer." Utravsky scrutinized Hobert. "Caesar mentioned you to me. Since you are here, it seems things have made new progress." Caesar was the Harvest Church cleric who had spoken with Hobert at Mr. A's gathering previously. "Yes," Hobert said. "Before that, I need to confirm our previous debt relationship. You still owe me 3/5 of a pharmacist potion formula, right? It can also be converted into £150 in cash. Of course, neither of us would prefer to deal in cash, but we can use cash to measure the upcoming transaction." Utravsky nodded in agreement, waiting for Hobert to continue. Hobert said, "At a gathering today, I found a magical item you need." He said, "It's a candle that has the ability to enter the deep spiritual realm and the bottom layer of the dream of both the opponent and the holder, and to materialize the corresponding scenes. It also has the ability to split personalities. It is preliminarily inferred to possess some abilities of a dream weaver and a hypnotist. The first ability can pull the opponent into a scene that is advantageous to oneself. The second ability is exactly what you need. It can split off your murderous personality and eliminate it. The negative effects are that it can only be used for a maximum of 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, the holder will get lost in the dream world. After entering the opponent's spiritual depths, the holder's spiritual realm is also open to the opponent, and the opponent can thus influence the holder. This magical item sells for £3,800. There was no sign of joy on Utravsky's face, as if the matter being discussed had nothing to do with him. A very fair price. Hobert smiled. "If I buy this magical item, adding the risk I bear and the intermediary fee, selling it to you for an additional £50 isn't excessive, is it?" "Not excessive," Utravsky said. Hobert continued, adding the £150 you previously owed me, it means you now owe me a total of £4,000. The value of the pharmacist potion formula is between £230 and £250. It just so happens that I have a friend who needs it, so let's say £250. So, even if you give me the pharmacist formula, you still owe me £3,750. Utravsky nodded, that's right. Hobert gave a helpless smile. The giant bishop was someone who was good at killing conversations. He could only say again, Bishop, oh, Father, do you have that much cash? No. Hobert asked again, then what do you plan to use to repay the debt? Utravsky glanced at Hobert, you seem to have already found a way for me to repay the debt. Hobert smiled innocently, I'm mainly thinking of you, Bishop. You're here to preach, not to do business, so it's hard to accumulate such a large fortune. Utravsky had no reaction, just quietly looking at Hobert. Hobert could only continue as if performing a one-man show, it's like this, I have a friend. Father, what kind of expression is that? It really is a friend, I'm not talking about myself. I have a friend who got into trouble with a Beander family. Members of that family are sending 1 sequence 6 and 2 sequence 7s to hunt him down. If you can kill or seriously injure their sequence 6, you will clear £2,000 of debt. If you only hold them off or drive them away, then you will also clear £1,000 of debt. If you can kill 2 enemies in battle, you will clear all your debts. As Hobert expected, Utravsky agreed to Hobert's proposal. For him, it was just a fight worth £1,000 to £2,000, which was a good deal. For Hobert, as long as the giant bishop could tie down the opponent's sequence 6, it would be enough. Hobert intended to keep at least 1 sequence 7 from the other side. Of course, if the plan went smoothly, both sequence 7s could be kept. Additionally, assuming the worst, if the other side also brought 2 sequence 8s, they would be kept as well. The extraordinary characteristics of just 4 Beyonders would be worth £4,000 to £5,000, and if there were other spoils of war, he would earn even more. This battle was a sure profit for Hobert. Furthermore, Hobert could also obtain more information about the Tamara family, and for him, this information was far more crucial than the spoils of war. In the future, the Tamara family was very likely to be his main enemy. After settling how to pay off the debt, Hobert said, Father, you need to give me the pharmacist formula first. I don't have enough money to buy that magical item, so I need to sell the pharmacist formula first before I can buy that magical item back. All right. Utravsky took out paper and pen from his pocket and wrote down the potion formula. Hobert took it and glanced at it. Main ingredients: horn of an adult winged unicorn, 3 grams of crown jellyfish venom crystal. Auxiliary ingredients: 10 grams of dragon's blood grass powder, 3 drops of colchicum essence, 6 petals of blooming ground spoon flower, 80 milliliters of pure water. Putting away the potion formula, Hobert smiled, I'll bring you the magical item tomorrow morning. Utravsky hummed and slowly lowered his head, preparing to continue his confession. Hobert walked a few steps away, then suddenly turned back and asked, Father, aren't you afraid that once I get the potion formula, I'll never come back? Utravsky didn't even lift his head. You are a person who understands restraint. Generally, such people know the dangers of greed. Hobert smiled and quickly left. He had only increased the price of the Heartmare candle by 3.8 times, but of course, on its own merits, this price was also very fair. Sitting back in the carriage, Hobert suddenly had the illusion that this Utravsky was very much like the eminent monks in his impression, not talkative, but very wise, especially in his unique insight into people. Leaving the Harvest Church, Hobert took a carriage to Viscount Glaine's mansion. Brulint was somewhat surprised to see the pharmacist potion formula, as it meant Hobert had reached a new agreement with the bishop of the Harvest Church. Brulint had his butler bring £270 in cash. Mr. Hobert, according to our previous agreement, you are to tell me the entire process of the transaction. Oh, should I invite Miss Audrey to listen as well? But it's already dark. How about we visit Audrey together? Hobert smiled. As you said, it's already very late today. I'll tell Miss Audrey when I have time. All right then, Audrey will definitely like this story. Next, Hobert roughly recounted the events. He did not specify the exact situation of the Heartmare candle or the price increase after he handled it, only saying that at a Beander gathering, he helped Bishop Utravsky find a magical item he needed. I really wish I could see how to divide and kill a person's personality, Grulint said with some regret. He picked up the potion formula. Where should I purchase these ingredients? Hobert said, I can try to help you purchase them. As far as I know, these auxiliary ingredients are easy to buy and not very expensive. The main ingredient is also not very scarce, but it often requires a stroke of luck to acquire. Grulint nodded. Then I'll leave it to you. Please help me gather the ingredients as soon as possible. I'm already impatient to become a pharmacist. After discussing the main business, Hobert casually mentioned a few anecdotes from the extraordinary world that the Viscount enjoyed hearing the most, and then Hobert got up to take his leave. Watching Hobert's departing figure, Grulint's gaze deepened. He said to his personal valet outside the door, help me write a letter to Miss Hugh and Furs, saying that I wish to obtain some information from them, and if necessary, I am willing to pay for the information. The valet bowed slightly and went to write the letter for the Viscount. On Monday morning, Hobert first showed up at the law firm, then went to visit clients. He first went to the Harvest Church to give the Heartmare candle to Bishop Utravsky. Then, without stopping, he rushed to the Obsidian Bar in the North District to meet with Dai Li. Dai Li laughed, I'm starting to regret recommending you as our informant. I've never seen a contact person as busy as I am. Hobert smiled, Madam, I'm here for something important this time, and you personally stand to gain a considerable benefit. Oh, recently, eh? Hobert looked at the deserted bar at that moment. He whispered, an extraordinary battle is about to occur in Backland. Extraordinary battles happen every day in Backland. This battle was planned by me. Dai Li also became interested. Tell me more. I have a friend. I know what that look means, but that really is my friend, Hobert said. I have a friend who is being hunted by an Beander family, and I want to set up an ambush to counter-kill them. I've already found a Sequence 6 helper. To be safe, I need another Sequence 6 helper, so I'd like to ask Miss Daly for help. It's asking for your help privately, not asking the Night Watcher squad for help. Dai Li was startled. So, you're not here to report. You're here to ask for my help. That's right, Hobert said. If Madam doesn't intend to help, this battle will still happen, just in a place unknown to the Night Watcher squad. Dai Li, with her shimmering blue eyeshadow, looked at Hobert. I feel like you're threatening me, implying that if I don't help, this matter will spiral out of the Night Watcher's control. Absolutely not, I'm just telling the truth, Hobert said. I am sincerely asking for your help. As long as you act, you will have the right to share the spoils, but your turn to choose spoils will be after mine. If you can kill a Sequence 7 or higher enemy in combat, your turn to choose spoils can be before mine. Your main enemy is most likely a Sequence 7. Dai Li hadn't expected that Hobert, who had just become a Night Watcher's informant, was already planning an extraordinary battle involving Sequence 6 and Sequence 7. This made Hobert seem even more mysterious, as if he was more than just the Commodore's eldest son. After weighing it for a few seconds, Dai Li finally said, I can agree to help, but you must first tell me how you knew the origin of 2 to 355. Hobert guessed that Dai Li would ask this question, and he was prepared. 2 to 355 has some connection with a special sealed artifact or magical item of the lawyer pathway that I've come into contact with. I used that sealed artifact to divine and deduce the origin of 2 to 355. I see. Dai Li nodded. Half a day before the battle begins, notify me of the time and place of the battle to give me time to prepare. No problem. Hobert breathed a sigh of relief. With 2 Sequence 6s in command, there would be no risk in this battle. One more chapter, as a warm-up for Wednesday, the 12th, when it goes on sale. Also, a pre-request for initial subscriptions. In a stone room underground, within the Night Watcher squad of the Backland Diocese. Captain Thomas asked Dai Li, who had just finished her divination, how are the results? Dai Li replied, Hobert told the truth. So Brigadier General Christine really has a sealed artifact related to 2 to 355. Thomas frowned. Why have I never heard of it? Dai Li speculated, perhaps it's not a sealed artifact held by Brigadier General Christine. No, impossible. Thomas said. Hobert is only sequence 9. How could he have a level 2 sealed artifact? At this time, they still didn't know Hobert had been promoted. Dai Li shook her head. It was correct for us to develop him as an informant, and even as an auxiliary member. This way, we at least generally know his movements and can impose some restrictions on him. Thomas sighed, no longer dwelling on the issue of sequence 9 and level 2 sealed artifacts. He asked Dai Li, have you thought about it? This is Sesama's second invitation. Joining the Red Gloves will give you broader development opportunities. Dai Li smiled and said, joining the Red Gloves means traveling everywhere, which is too boring. Thomas lamented, this is an opportunity many people dream of. Around 2 p.m., Hobert arrived at 192 Blanca Street. What he told Dai Li in the morning was, of course, the truth. Isn't Country of Disorder precisely the sealed artifact and magical item unique to the lawyer pathway? Moreover, 2 to 355 does have some association with Country of Disorder. This was a statement he had prepared long ago, sufficient to deal with divination and other methods of discerning lies. As for the diviner wanting to divine more specific information, due to the status of Country of Disorder, the opponent's divination would surely end in failure. Therefore, the Night Watchers could only divine the truthfulness of Hobert's words, but could not divine more detailed information. At exactly 3 o'clock, Hobert's vision was submerged by the gray fog. Familiar figures appeared in the ancient palace, and the Tarot Club officially began. The Fool Klein and Justice Audrey, one with spirit vision and the other an audience, immediately noticed that Hobert was different from the last gathering. Especially Klein, under his spirit vision, Hobert's astral body was more condensed, and its color was more inclined to black. He had already been promoted. He had only joined the Tarot Club a month ago, and he was already sequence 8. The hanged man Alger was the last to notice the anomaly. He didn't know what to say, and for a moment, the hall fell into a brief silence. Finally, Audrey's greeting broke the silence. This week, Hobert and the other two still hadn't obtained Emperor Rosel's diary, so they directly skipped to the transaction segment. Hobert and Audrey both looked at Alger. Alger cleared his throat and said to Hobert, "Thank you for your suggestion, which allowed me to find new clues in the ruins." Audrey seemed even happier than Alger. "So, there really are hidden clues in the ruins?" "Yes." Alger, as agreed at the last gathering, briefly recounted his process of secretly exploring the ruins. However, he only casually mentioned his gains and did not disclose the 3 locations left by the skeleton. Audrey smiled and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Hanged Man. Following these clues, you should still have more gains." Hobert reminded him, "Opportunity always coexists with risk. I hope you can continue to be as cautious as ever." "I will." Alger then said, "Before I continue exploring along the clues, I really want to understand one thing." He said, "Suppose my family hides a secret, and I don't have the ability to enjoy the benefits this secret brings. Then, before I die, I would never leave this secret in this world. But why did the skeleton make such an abnormal move? Is there some trap involved? Or is there a secret hidden that I don't know?" Alger kept looking at Hobert as he asked the question, clearly asking him. Hobert organized his words before saying, "Before, I mentioned that there are 3 laws of extraordinary characteristics. Your question can be answered using the second law. Well, not only that, you can also understand the hostile relationships between deities. Why there is the current situation between countries, and so on. Everyone tried to hide their inner surprise. The reason deities are hostile to each other isn't because of differing doctrinal beliefs. The trigger for their conflicts turned out to be the laws of extraordinary characteristics. Alger hesitated slightly before asking, if I want to know this answer, what kind of price do I have to pay? Hobert smiled and said, first, I must state that whether it's the laws of extraordinary characteristics or the details about the elf from last week, the preciousness of this information is almost immeasurable by money. I know, Alger said. So please, name a compensation I can afford. £1,500. Hobert said. However, I suggest that Miss Justice pays this money. Alger didn't understand Hobert's meaning. Audrey was also stunned. Me? Yes. Hobert said, didn't Miss Justice want to obtain this information before? Moreover, last week when I communicated with the hanged man, I didn't deliberately avoid you, which allowed you to obtain information about the elf for free. Not only that, you also heard the hanged man's entire process of exploring the ruins for free. Therefore, I believe it is most appropriate for you to pay for this information today. This way, none of us three owes the other, and we all obtained information that is difficult to come by in our respective circles. Klein, behind the fog, sighed. As expected of a lawyer, a few words clarified the debt relationships among the three parties. Of course, the happiest one in this transaction was Klein. He didn't have to spend a single penny to get information from the hanged man and emperor. At this moment, he felt emotional. The platform was truly the biggest winner. Audrey thought for a moment and felt that emperor made sense, and she was indeed very interested in this information and willing to pay the money. Okay, Mr. Emperor, should the money still be sent to the original address? No hurry. Hobert was not short of money at the moment. I will ask for it when I need it. Perhaps I will need your help in the future, and that can also appropriately offset this debt. Audrey nodded. Okay. Hobert then said to Alger, I have one more request. I want to know your subsequent exploration process. No problem. After settling on the compensation, Hobert said, the second law of extraordinary characteristics is called the conservation of extraordinary characteristics. There are only so many extraordinary characteristics in the world, there will be no more, and no less. The ancient hall fell silent once again. Klein, Alger, and Audrey all had their own associations in their minds, and then these associations exploded, and they realized how astonishing this information truly was. Hobert then said, there's a saying popular in the extraordinary world, from the moment you consume the potion, it has already been decided who your enemies are and who your friends are. Hobert's words sent the other three into a longer period of contemplation. Klein finally understood why the church didn't publicize the acting method. Extraordinary characteristics are conserved. There are only so many of them, and if everyone quickly digested their potions and wanted to advance, a simpler method than finding increasingly rare extraordinary materials would be to obtain extraordinary characteristics from others. Just making a simple assumption, it was a very bloody and terrifying thing. Hobert continued, let's return to Mr. Hanged Man's question. That skeleton drew this secret hoping that one day someone would pick up the extraordinary characteristics left behind by those three high-level elf. When the Elf King's authority was seized back then, the surviving elf harbored resentment. They hated whoever held the authority of the Storm of Lord. So they wished for more pirates to know about those three locations. As long as these three extraordinary characteristics did not belong to the Storm Church, then the person who obtained the extraordinary characteristics would definitely be an enemy of the Storm Church. Of course, this secret might very well be obtained by the Storm Church, but even if someone from the Storm Church obtained such important information, there's a high probability they wouldn't report it upwards. This is an excellent opportunity to establish one's own faction. If one can get one of those extraordinary characteristics, the 4 kings of the sea will become 5 kings. Klein looked at Alger thoughtfully, and Alger, hearing these words, naturally felt his blood boil. What the emperor said was exactly what he pursued. Hobert said, since there's a high probability it will cause trouble for the Storm Church, or rather, for the Storm of Lord, then the skeleton would naturally try every possible way to preserve this secret. I understand, Alger said. No wonder the Ruin Kingdom and the Fenaport Kingdom have been enemies for most of history. But, He then asked, but why does the Storm Church antagonize the Church of Knowledge and the Eternal Blazing Sun Church? Hobert smiled. That's another question, and the answer to that question is just as valuable as the conservation of extraordinary characteristics, perhaps even more valuable. In other words, a new transaction would have to be initiated, but the conservation of extraordinary characteristics was enough for them to digest for a while. Neither Alger nor Audrey had any intention of continuing the transaction. Each person had their own guesses, and the transaction ended there. Alger understood the risks he faced and prepared to investigate from the side. During the free communication segment, no one had any noteworthy information this week. After a few brief words, this tarot club concluded. Leaving the gray fog, Hobert returned to his rented room. He stretched, knowing he still had to buy materials for the pharmacist potion and visit Apton. Hobert lay on his bed with a sigh. This week has been truly busy. Alger sat in the captain's cabin, silent for a long time. He hadn't expected the hatred among Beander to originate from fundamental laws. Captain. An urgent telegram from Storm Abyss. A crew member knocked on the door. Alger was startled. As a Storm Church member posing as a pirate, he had almost never received a telegram from Storm Abyss. He immediately opened the door and took the telegram from his subordinate. Investigate the whereabouts of Keelingers. Keelingers. Alger's eyes narrowed. Why would Storm Abyss investigate him? Backland, Queen's Avenue. Shu and Furs came out from Viscount Glaine's place. Shu was a little worried. Is it really okay that we revealed so much information about Hobert to Grelint? Unless the Viscount is a member of the Aurora Order, Furs smiled. Hobert himself briefly mentioned you're in his search for Zachary before. This means that, for him, this operation didn't need to be kept secret among the members of the Justice League. We merely supplemented some details, so there shouldn't be any problem. Shu was still a bit curious. Why is Viscount Glaine suddenly interested in Hobert's deeds? Doesn't the Viscount always enjoy hearing stories from the extraordinary world? Furs didn't take it too seriously. Shu slowly nodded. She felt that if there was an opportunity, she should remind Hobert. Backland, 51 Henry Street. Hobert entered the Gale herbalist shop. Gale was wiping the counter. Dear Mr. Hobert, you've come to patronize my business again. Hobert smiled. I need to buy some special materials. Gale immediately understood Hobert's meaning. Please follow me. He rang the bell inside the counter, had a shop assistant come out to mind the shop, and then invited Hobert to enter the backyard through a side door. Having had several previous transactions, Hobert had a basic trust in Gale, so he followed Gale into the backyard. The herbalist shop's backyard was large, with many unprocessed herbs drying, and the entire yard was filled with the scent of medicinal ingredients. Gale led Hobert to a small room. What do you need? Hobert said, the horn of an adult winged unicorn, and the crystallized venom of a crown jellyfish. By only purchasing these two main materials, the other party wouldn't know Hobert's purpose. Gale said, the horn of an adult winged unicorn is in the warehouse. We don't have the crystallized venom of a crown jellyfish in stock. Please come back after 10 a.m. tomorrow, and I guarantee I'll have both materials you need. Both of these materials are quite expensive. The price should be between £320 and £350. Hobert nodded. Okay, I'll come back tomorrow. Leaving the Gale herbalist shop, Hobert first went home to tell the butler that he would be back later today and asked the butler to save him dinner. Then, Hobert took a carriage to the suburbs and walked a few kilometers to the woods across from Apton's yard. Hobert first observed the area using the last rays of the setting sun, confirming that Apton was still alive. After night fell, he used his agile movements to reach the second floor and entered Apton's bedroom through the window. Apton was very happy to see Hobert in his mask. The fact that the other party could appear before him again meant that he had already decided to help him deal with the Tamara family. Hobert went straight to the point. You need to move near the Harvest Church in the South Bridge district. I will set up an ambush there, waiting for the members of the Tamara family to arrive. Although the Harvest Church was legal in Backland, Bishop Utravsky was not a legal Beander. Because of Lee's involvement in the division of spoils, if the giant bishop fought near the Harvest Church, the Night Watchers could turn a blind eye. Fighting dozens of kilometers away was another matter. Additionally, the Harvest Church was also an excellent ambush point. Apton nodded repeatedly. Good, good, good. I'll rent a quiet house in the South Bridge district tomorrow. He said, as I mentioned before, my mother was an astrologer, so our spiritual perception is naturally very high. I have a premonition that family members might find me in the next few days. After you move to the South Bridge district, I will wait nearby, Hobert said. You must frequently wear the astrologer's hair, or if your spirituality gives you a very dangerous warning, you must notify me immediately. He said, furthermore, in this battle, unless you play a significant role, you will not have the right to share in the spoils. The listing date yesterday was wrong, it's Wednesday, the 12th. Of course, Apton had no objections to Hobert's plan for dealing with the spoils, his survival was the greatest gain from this battle. However, Apton also had other needs. He said to Hobert, I don't need any spoils. Additionally, I will give you the reward I promised before, but I need the corpse of a Tamara family member who has recently died. Hobert realized this might be the material used to evade the Tamara family's divination. He asked with some curiosity, can't you use your mother's corpse? Apton shook his head. My father's notes say it must be the spirituality of other family members, not from our immediate family. Hobert nodded. Once you've rented a house, wait for me at the Harvest Church. Early the next morning, Hobert first wrote a letter to Zio, telling her that he had agreed to help Apton and to have the two ladies prepare for battle. He naturally didn't specify what kind of help he would provide to Apton, but Hobert believed Zio would understand his meaning when she saw the letter. After staying in the office until past 9, Hobert went out again to visit clients. He went to Gale Herbalist shop and spent £330 to buy a complete horn of an adult unicorn Pegasus and 5 grams of crystallized crown jellyfish venom. Then Hobert spent another £30 buying many herbs used in mysticism. The auxiliary materials for the pharmacist were mixed in with these herbs, and Hobert generally bought much more than needed. For a few drops of columbine essence, he bought a small bottle, and for a few petals of ground spoon flower, he bought 2 whole flowers. All the materials combined cost £360. Hobert quoted Brulint £420, as he had made 2 trips and taken on some risk. Viscount Glaint paid readily and then asked Hobert to help him concoct the potion. Hobert prepared all the materials and was about to begin concocting when he suddenly felt as if a pair of eyes were watching him in Brulint. Hobert quickly opened his spiritual vision but found no trace of hidden undead creatures or other magical beings in the shadows. Brulint urged, aren't you ready yet? Hobert shook his head, concocting the potion while paying attention to his surroundings. That feeling of being watched persisted until Hobert had finished concocting the potion and Brulint impatiently drank it. Only then did the hidden gaze disappear. Hobert looked deeply at Viscount Glaint beside him. Brulint seemed completely unaware, taking a deep breath with a look of enjoyment. Many herbs and medicinal formulas have appeared in my mind. Hobert did not ask, but smiled. This is the magic of the potion. Viscount Glaint asked, do you have any good suggestions for pharmacist? In my opinion, a pharmacist can also be a poison master, Hobert smiled. After all, the main ingredient contains crystallized crown jellyfish venom. Besides giving you a certain ability to resist toxins and poisons, theoretically, you should also possess some knowledge of poisons. Viscount Glaint closed his eyes, as if recalling something, and after a while, he opened his eyes and said, you are right, I can indeed concoct many kinds of poisons. Fortunately, you reminded me, otherwise I might not have realized this for a long time. He took out his pocket watch and glanced at it, then suddenly whispered to Hobert, I'd like to invite you to dinner tonight. Please make sure to come. Hobert was taken aback. It was just a meal together, did he need to whisper like that? However, thinking of the gaze from earlier, Hobert said nothing and slowly nodded. Leaving Viscount Glaint's residence, Hobert found a place for lunch and then went to the Harvest Church in Southbridge district. Before entering the church, he put on his mask again. Stepping through the church doors, he indeed saw Apton sitting restlessly in a pew. Bishop Utravsky, who was sitting in the front row flipping through a classical text, glanced at Hobert, then continued to read the Life Bible in front of him. Apton saw Hobert's mask and let out a long sigh of relief. "You're finally here," he whispered. "The bishop of this church is really too scary." Hobert's mouth twitched. "Aren't you afraid of giant bishop's fist the size of a casserole?" he asked. "Have you rented a house?" "Yes, it's at 103 on the next street." "Then you can go back. If you have any premonition of danger, come to the church immediately and notify me." Apton nodded, took a deep breath, and stood up to leave. Hobert took off his mask, and Bishop Utravsky said, "This is a church, not a place for you to plot conspiracies." Hobert smiled. "Doesn't the Mother's Church refuse no one?" This made Bishop Utravsky slightly taken aback. Hobert stood up and sat beside Bishop Utravsky. "Father, I heard that your church has beyonders who are good at cultivating crops." "Yes, they can double crop yields and know various grafting and cultivation methods." Many fish and mushrooms suddenly appeared in Hobert's mind. He shook his head to dismiss these thoughts. "Father, have you been to the East District of Backland?" "No, but I've heard of it." "Father, why are so many people starving?" Bishop Utravsky looked deeply at Hobert. "This is precisely my motivation for spreading the Mother's light. When the Mother's light shines upon this land, no one will starve anymore." "Father, you are wrong. Even if there is enough food for everyone to eat their fill, people will still starve. Do you believe me?" Hobert looked at the holy symbol of life in front of him. "Humans have given life meaning, but they themselves live without much meaning." He paused and then added, "In my opinion, everyone should have the right to eat their fill." Utravsky slowly said, "In the Mother's eyes, every life has meaning." "That's not enough." Hobert suddenly shook his head. "Let's not discuss this heavy topic. May I see your church's Life Bible?" Of course. So, throughout the afternoon, Hobert read the Earth Mother Church's Life Bible. He read it slowly and carefully. Only the sound of turning pages remained in the church, solemn and sacred. As night fell, Hobert, not having received any warning from Apton, took a carriage to Queen's Avenue. Viscount Glaint was already waiting in the dining room. The two exchanged a few pleasantries, and then the dishes began to be served. The Viscount's chef was a true master, and the dishes were both beautiful and delicious. However, each dish was too small, and after eating over a dozen dishes, he was just barely full. In their casual conversation, Hobert learned that the Viscount's family ate like this for every meal. He smiled and commented, "This really lacks a family atmosphere." The whole process was like dining in a high-end restaurant. Brulint gave a wry smile. "There's no other way. I was told from a young age that a Viscount should eat this way. If I simplified the dining process, then tomorrow there would be rumors that Viscount Glaint was going bankrupt." Viscount Glaint's words made Hobert take a sip of red wine and smile, looking at the neat dining table, but he suddenly thought of the food in a cheap coffee shop. After finishing dessert and fruit, and drinking a few sips of tea, the entire dinner finally ended. Brulint stood up and said, "I still have many questions I'd like to ask about the pharmacist. Please follow me to the study." When the two arrived in the study, Brulint took out his pocket watch and looked at it before quietly saying, "Mr. Hobert, I invited you here because I have something I'd like to entrust you to investigate for me." Hobert sat opposite the Viscount. "Logically speaking, we are both founders of the Justice League, so I should help. However, your commission is too dangerous. I'm sorry, I refuse." Brulint was stunned. "I haven't even told you what the commission is. I only know that when I was preparing the potion for you, someone was constantly watching us." Hobert leaned back in his chair. "I'm just a sequence 8, and my father doesn't seem to be highly regarded, so I don't want to get involved in the struggles between nobles." Brulint smiled and said, "You are even more astute than I imagined." He said, "Let me first tell you about my commission, you can choose not to accept it." Hobert gave a wry smile. "Respected Viscount, some things, even just knowing them, might bring me trouble. Grulint said, "Don't worry, no one is eavesdropping on our conversation anymore. The person secretly monitoring me left after confirming that I had taken the pharmacist potion this afternoon." He opened his pocket watch and showed it to Hobert. The pocket watch looked quite old, and he didn't know if it was broken. The hands were stopped and motionless. Grulint said, "This is a magical item. As long as I am being listened to or watched, the hands of the pocket watch will move normally. If no one is listening, watching, or observing us, the hands will remain motionless." Hobert recalled that he did remember Grulint often looking at his pocket watch. He used to think the Viscount had a strong sense of time, but now he realized he was checking if anyone was monitoring him. "All right," Hobert said, "I'll listen to your commission first, but you must explain its dangers. I have observed you for some time. Your handling of extraordinary events is very cautious and professional. I think even if you cannot complete the commission, it will not bring us danger." Grulint took a sketch from a drawer. "The commission is actually very simple. I want to ask you to retrieve a ring belonging to my father. This is the shape of the ring I drew this afternoon." The ring looked very ordinary, with gold, with a red gem written next to it. Grulint looked at the ring and let out a long sigh. "The year I turned 18, my father told me that the origin of the Glenant family and its family history were all in that ring, along with many valuable materials left by our ancestors. My father once said that when I get married, he would let me inherit this ring to continue the family's glory. But," Grulint said coldly, "but, I did not find this ring on my father's body." His usual gentle demeanor vanished without a trace. He was cold, as if he had become a different person. Hobert memorized the ring's appearance. "I remember your esteemed father passed away due to illness, right?" Grulint nodded. "That's what they said." Hobert did not ask who they referred to. The contents of the ring may have fallen into the enemy's hands. "No," Viscount Glaint said, "a spell is needed to open the ring's space, and only my father and I know that spell." He added, "Also, they didn't give me my father's extraordinary characteristic." That's right. I'm not completely ignorant of the extraordinary world. The Glenant family has actually always been a Beander family. But by my generation, because I am an only child, and taking potions carries the risk of losing control, my father, for safety's sake, only allowed me to take the potion after I had children. But unexpectedly, my father died of illness before I even got married, and I was also put under surveillance." Grulint smiled coldly. "Only when I take a potion that poses no threat to them can they truly rest assured and abandon their monitoring of me. These plans, these thoughts, must have been suppressed for a long time." After Grulint finished speaking, his expression clearly relaxed a lot. He covered his face and said, "Although I have escaped their surveillance, I may never be able to avenge my father." Hobert had been a good listener. Just as he had said before, he did not want to get involved in the struggles between nobles. After a while, Viscount Glaint emerged from his emotions. "As for the risk of this commission, I am not clear, because I don't know if my father's ring was hidden by him before he died, or if it was taken by the murderer. All of this requires you to investigate. Of course, safety should be your priority. If you sense danger, you can abandon the active investigation. In short, the choice is yours. For me, maintaining the inheritance of the Glenant family is most important, so the family history and those valuable materials must be retrieved. This will be a long-term commission. I am very clear that it may take several years or even more than a decade to get results. Starting today, I will not talk to you about this matter again until you have made some progress. As for the reward, I can only say that it will definitely satisfy you." Hobert considered for a moment before saying, "Viscount, I must say your caution is the most correct choice." He said, "Unless I encounter a clear clue, I will only conduct the investigation after I become stronger and have more means to avoid risks." Grulint smiled and said, "Such a promise from you is enough." Although he had already gotten rid of the monitors, Grulint seemed to have developed a habit of acting. When he saw Hobert out, he was still enthusiastically discussing some occult questions with Hobert. After Hobert got into the carriage, he still looked as if he hadn't had enough. Inside the carriage, Hobert smiled. Nobles also have their own difficulties. Upon returning home, Hobert heard from the butler that Christine was still in the study, so he knocked on the door and told Christine about his plan to use Apton as bait. Christine nodded. Sounds pretty good. Then he suddenly brought up another matter. I made a very important choice earlier, and now it's time to pay for that choice, which might affect you. In about half a year, you will need to pay attention to every question I ask and make your choice after careful consideration. Hobert was stunned. It seemed that it wasn't just the nobles of Backland who couldn't help themselves. Christine also seemed to have his difficulties. Okay, I'll pay attention. Back in his room, Hobert couldn't fall asleep for a long time. He always felt that the conversations with Grelint and Christine today contained a lot of information, and there was a feeling of the calm before the storm. It was only at midnight that Hobert collected himself and quickly fell asleep, as he had to read the Life Bible again the next day. On Wednesday morning, Hobert went out early again to visit clients, reading scriptures at the Harvest Church all morning and even getting a free lunch. Around 2 in the afternoon, Apton entered the church somewhat flustered. I just put on the astrologer's hair, and immediately had a premonition of danger. The release time is 12 p.m. on Wednesday. The author plans to release 6 chapters directly. 5 chapters will be updated a few minutes past 12 p.m., and 1 more chapter will be updated around 2 or 3 o'clock. First, let's talk about this book. As you may have noticed, the author's conception is basically rigorous, at least so far there haven't been any major loopholes. The foreshadowing left earlier will also begin to unfold little by little, and the plot in the later stages will definitely become more and more exciting. The only thing to worry about might be the pacing. For example, before Sequence 8, the pacing was a bit slow. Also, there's a structural issue. The Henry family's case should have been delayed, allowing the protagonist to discover the core acting principles of the lawyer earlier. The author will learn from this lesson and handle the Sequence 8 stage more reasonably. Additionally, if all goes well, the length of this book should be over 2 million characters, and the author has a relatively complete writing plan, so everyone can rest assured and continue reading. Finally, the author thanks everyone for their support and cherishes it greatly. He will do his best to write this book well. Thank you for your companionship, and please continue to accompany the author on this journey to see the author's story. Also, the book's group number is 373,209,103. The password is, I am not Aemon. Everyone is welcome to join the group. Having already seen Apton in advance and put on his mask, Hobert said, I understand. Don't panic. You've had a premonition of danger, which might mean they'll monitor you within 6 hours. This is Backland. They won't launch an attack until at least the latter half of the night, so we have enough time. Hobert's calmness made Apton let out a long sigh of relief. Hobert then said, you go back first. After the battle begins tonight, if the enemies are roughly as we predicted, 1 Sequence 6, 2 Sequence 7s, and a Sequence 8, you use the sealed artifact to at least tie up 1 Sequence 7 for half a minute. Apton nodded repeatedly and quickly left. Hobert said to Bishop Utravsky, Father, the horn of battle has sounded. Please prepare yourself. Utravsky slowly nodded, then began to confess to the holy symbol of life, confessing that he was going to use force to solve the problem again. Hobert left the church with his mask on, only taking it off after he got into a taxi carriage. He returned home and left a note for Christine, tonight is the hunting hour. This was Hobert's trump card. Although Christine hadn't agreed to help, she would definitely go to watch the battle. If the situation completely spiraled out of control, he could ask Christine to intervene to save his life. Then he went to the North District, directly to Blackthorn Security Company to pick up Dai Li and collect 2 to 355. Finally, he went to pick up Zio and Furs. Hobert and Dai Li took a taxi carriage to the address Zio had left. Hobert got out and knocked on the door for a long time before an old lady opened it. Young man, who are you looking for? Hobert froze in place. He didn't remember the original work mentioning Zio and Furs hiring a servant. And this old lady was already so old, it seemed like she could die on the job at any moment. Who would dare hire her as a servant? At this moment, the opposite door opened, and Zio smiled at the old lady. "Aunt Martina, he's looking for me. I think he must have remembered the wrong house number." Hobert's mouth twitched. After everyone got into the carriage, he said somewhat helplessly, "You guys are too cautious, aren't you?" Zio was a little embarrassed, turning her head away as she smoothed her somewhat frizzy hair, but Furs smiled and said, "You're the only gentleman who knows our address." She might have realized her words were a bit ambiguous, so she quickly added, "We need to avoid searches by official Beyonders, and we also need to be careful of other wild Beyonders." Hobert pointed to Dai Li, who had been silent. "I'll tell you some unfortunate news, this is an official Beyonder." Furs suddenly looked at Dai Li, who had blue eyeshadow, then she prepared to open the door of the carriage and escape. Her first thought was, did Hobert betray us? You see, even if wild Beyonders haven't committed crimes, official Beyonders will still arrest them, imprison them, and treat them as test subjects for sealed artifacts. Therefore, wild Beyonders are like natural prisoners. Zio then asked, "Is this official Beyonder also participating in our operation?" Zio, who usually thinks a beat slower, was very calm because she trusted Hobert and knew he wouldn't betray them. "That's right." Hobert introduced, "Miss Daly is a senior member of the Night Watcher squad. Before you got in the car, she already agreed not to use today's opportunity to pursue you." Dai Li was startled, because they hadn't discussed this topic at all just now. "But the condition is that I will be the one to monitor your status." Hobert continued, "Once there are signs of losing control, come to me quickly. Trust me, as long as it's in the early stages of losing control, I'll have a way to prevent you from losing control." Furs breathed a sigh of relief and, along with Zio, promised to constantly pay attention to their status. Dai Li also nodded imperceptibly. Hobert's words just now were taking responsibility for the status of these two ladies. If the status of these two wild Beyonders was within the monitoring range of the Night Watcher's informant, then it might indeed not be necessary to arrest them. Because of the presence of Dai Li, an official Beyonder, Furs and Zio were not as lively as usual. In a slightly solemn atmosphere, the group arrived at Harvest Church. Dai Li stood at the entrance. Harvest Church. Hobert walked in front. "That's right, it's Harvest Church." Furs looked at the small church in front of them and said, "I didn't even know there was a Harvest Church in Backland." The group entered the church and sat in the front row. The giant bishop, huge as a small mountain, caught their attention. Hobert felt as if he was back home. "Just sit anywhere, don't be shy." After Dai Li and the others found seats, Hobert explained, "Among the enemies are Beyonders skilled in divination. Waiting for their arrival in the church can effectively interfere with their divination. Don't look at how small the church is, even the smallest church is still a church. As long as it's related to a god, the divination results will be affected, or the divination results will be distorted." Dai Li sighed, "You really know a lot." Zio and Furs once again felt like they were gaining knowledge. "Your conspiracy will make the gods look sideways." Utravsky suddenly said, "This is not a good thing for you." Hobert directly ignored the priest's warning. "This is another helper I invited, Bishop Utravsky. You can call him Father. Father, please come over here. Let's have a pre-battle meeting." Utravsky lowered his head somewhat helplessly and confessed a few words before sitting down. Zio and Furs exchanged glances. What kind of friends did Hobert know? "I guess the enemy's divination can roughly know about Apton. Oh, that's my friend who's being hunted. Ahahaha, I can tell from your expressions that you didn't expect me to really have such a friend, did you?" Hobert said cheerfully, "They can roughly know that Apton is currently a Sequence 8 and has a sealed artifact. Facing such an enemy, them dispatching one Sequence 6 and two Sequence 7s is already a luxurious lineup, while our side has two Sequence 6s, two Sequence 8s, and two Sequence 9s, and can also use a Grade 2 sealed artifact. Our strength is by no means inferior." Zio, Furs and Dai Li were slightly stunned before realizing that Hobert had already advanced. Miss Daly and Father Utravsky have more practical experience than I do, Hobert said, so I'll just give a general tactical plan. If needed, you can make tactical adjustments at any time. Just after midnight, a carriage stopped on the street next to Harvest Church. 4 men and 1 woman, 5 people in total, got out of the carriage one after another. Led by their leader, they quickly walked towards No. 103. The plan had already been discussed in the carriage. Upon approaching number 103, 2 Sequence 8s quickly walked towards the building opposite No. 103. When they did their reconnaissance in the afternoon, they found that Apton had hired 2 female helpers who were not very strong. The 2 Sequence 8s were to deal with those 2 helpers. The leader ordered the attack, and 3 Middle Sequence Beyonders immediately launched a surprise attack. Just then, the light of dawn suddenly appeared on the street, and a tall figure descended from the sky. Chapter 97. The correct way to open 2 to 355. Bishop Utravsky's attack marked the beginning of the battle. He wielded a great sword made of light, and each downward chop and horizontal sweep was magnificent. At this moment, he had shed his priest's robes and changed into an oversized, extended knight's tunic, which made his every movement clean and sharp. The gentleness and kindness he displayed during sermons had long vanished. 3 Middle Sequence Beyonders were blocked by Utravsky alone. From the building where the giant bishop had leapt out, another man and woman, both wearing masks, jumped out. Apton also took the initiative, using astrologer's hair to summon a helper from the spirit world. The 3 Middle Sequence Beyonders, however, were not flustered. One of them threw a stone towards Hobert and the others, completing the bribe process, weakening. He was a Sequence 6 corrupted baron. Hobert and Dai Li immediately felt a significant weakening in their strength and speed. Only the dawn light on Utravsky's body and greatsword remained undiminished. The greatsword in his hand could cut through all extraordinary attacks, provided the enemy's extraordinary attacks were not too far above his sequence. After Dai Li reached her tactical position, disregarding the weakening of her own spirituality, she connected to the spirit world and summoned an undead creature with a slender head and a long blade in its hand. This undead creature was dressed in tattered clothes, reduced to only a skeleton and bones, but it moved agilely, its eyes flashing with red light, possessing an indescribable majesty. The other Middle Sequence Beyander of the opposing side also struck at the opportune moment, saying to the skeleton, "Exile." The newly appeared skeleton had barely shown itself before it was pushed back step by an invisible force. Hobert and Dai Li exchanged glances. The opponent actually had 2 Sequence 6 Beyonders, the Beyander who just exiled the skeleton was a judge. Even so, they could only proceed according to their pre-arranged tactics. The appearance of the skeleton was actually to provide cover for Hobert. At this moment, he had already rushed to the middle of the battlefield. He thrust his staff fiercely into the ground with both hands. Order. A black sacred light flashed from the staff, and then the staff quickly grew thicker and taller. Upon reaching a height of 4 or 5 meters, the staff began to branch out, and in the blink of an eye, the rudimentary shape of a tree canopy appeared. Every leaf of the canopy was deep black, obscuring the not-so-bright moonlight. The branches continuously spread, forming a giant tree canopy spanning over 10 meters in radius. The sudden appearance of a towering tree on flat ground was a shocking sight, drawing the attention of everyone on the battlefield and those watching from afar. Immediately after, the dawn light on Utravsky's body grew even brighter, illuminating an area of 20 to 30 meters around him. The skeleton summoned by Dai Li radiated a golden light. Its upper and lower teeth clacked together, emitting a hee-hee laugh. The previous exile could no longer stop it. Hobert ensured that the order under the tree canopy was more conducive to the power of dawn light and the power of the undead. The opponent was very likely to have a sealed artifact, so Hobert's tactic was to go all out from the start. Then, they would start by breaking through the opponent's low sequence beyonders. With the blessing of the Order Wood, Dai Li and the other 2 had gained the upper hand against the 3 middle sequence enemies. Hobert quickly withdrew from the battlefield. Using his manipulation of the order under the tree canopy, he distorted the distance and quickly arrived at their side of the battlefield. At this time, the two Sequence 8 Beyonders had not yet met with Zio and Furs. They both lacked long-range extraordinary abilities, so they could only choose close-quarters combat. In the afternoon, they had deliberately allowed themselves to be discovered by the enemy, following Hobert's plan to create a separation in the battlefield. When Hobert rushed to this side of the battlefield, he had already lifted 2 to 355 in his hand. This made him suddenly think of a historical figure, Linglong Pagoda, Ta Linglong, Linglong Treasure Pagoda. Bah, I'm not Neja's father. Hobert quickly composed himself, took out the dagger he had prepared, and made a thrusting motion with his other arm. Then, he used 2 to 355 to pull one of the Sequence 8 Beyonders to his side. PFF'd. The opponent was still confused about what was happening when he was stabbed with a dagger. However, it was just one dagger, not fatal to a Beyonder, especially since the enemy was a barbarian with a very strong physique. The barbarian, in a berserk state, reacted and punched fiercely at Hobert, but it was like hitting air. His fist disappeared within half a meter of Hobert. This was also why Hobert dared to pull the enemy to his side. Only extraordinary abilities could harm him when he was holding 2 to 355, all physical attacks were ineffective against him. Since they were in the city, Hobert couldn't use a gun, otherwise he would have made the opponent collide directly with his gun barrel. While the barbarian was still bewildered, his position changed again. PFF'd. Before he could react, Zio's triangular awl had already pierced his lower abdomen. You are too despicable. The barbarian roared, swinging his fist at the short Zio. Zio agilely dodged, preparing her next strike. Meanwhile, on the other side, Furs, wielding a short blade, also utilized her open door ability to move through walls. She either dodged enemy attacks or appeared behind the enemy to launch sneak attacks, actually growing stronger as the battle progressed. This tactic was something Hobert had helped her devise in the afternoon. Furs seemed to have suddenly opened up a new world. Before, she had only thought her ability was suitable for being a master thief, but she had never thought of using open door to block enemy attacks or to ambush opponents. It was just that this fighting style, well, in Hobert's words, was a bit dirty. At this moment, Hobert was putting his somewhat dirty tactic to full use, grabbing the opponent to give him a dagger stab, then throwing the opponent to Zio's side for a triangular all strike. The sounds of PFFT, PFFT were incessant. At this point, the barbarian hated why his physique was so strong, he wished for a quick end. In just over half a minute, the two Sequence 8 Beyonders were riddled with holes by the combined efforts of Hobert, Zio, and Furs. Before they died, they sent warnings and pleas for help to the judge not far away. However, at this moment, Utravsky was fighting with increasing ferocity, and the corrupted Baron was already a bit flustered. Dai Li also summoned a second undead creature. This undead wore a wide, thick hood, and its appearance caused the judge to experience a certain freezing effect. Combined with the skeleton undead's scythe attacks, it left the judge with no spare energy to save anyone. The only one still holding the upper hand was the astrologer on the other side, but she lacked effective offensive means and couldn't support the two Sequence 8 Beyonders. The judge was the leader of this operation, and he still couldn't understand why his companion's divination had such a large error. Didn't they say there was only a certain risk, but not a significant one? However, now was not the time to dwell on these things. He did not linger in battle and immediately said, "Go." But it was already too late. Hobert had already joined the battle with 2 to 355, while Zio and Furs were clearing the battlefield on their side. The retreat of the three middle sequence enemies was intercepted by Hobert using 2 to 355. The judge and the corrupted Baron were not fools. They launched two extraordinary abilities, corrosion and imprisonment, at Hobert. Hobert, using his identity as the holder of the Order Wood, twisted the target of their extraordinary ability attacks to the Order Wood. Their attacks were equivalent to providing nourishment for the Order would. Under the influence of the Order would in 2 to 355, Hobert was difficult to harm. But that was all, he also didn't have enough means to harm 2 Sequence 6 Beyonders. To pull any Sequence 6 Beyonder to his side would be suicide. The barbarian did not have enough extraordinary abilities as attack methods, but the judge and the corrupted baron certainly did not lack such means. Hobert dared not be careless and moved behind Yutravsky and Dai to assist them. Seeing that his side had no hope of victory and could not escape, the corrupted baron shouted, "Prepare." The judge and the astrologer immediately moved behind the Order would. Hobert immediately realized something was wrong. He shifted the corrupted baron's position in front of the judge, and the judge once again made a move to evade. At this moment, the corrupted baron had put on a black glove. Suddenly, his appearance became extraordinarily tall and majestic, and his eyes seemed to burn with black flames. He seemed to be in great pain, and his deep, majestic black eyes gazed at Hobert and the others. Hobert and the others immediately froze in place, feeling that their spirituality had been damaged to varying degrees. The 2 undead summoned by Dai instantly turned into a pile of white bones, and one was left with only a hood. Soon, they both disappeared, returning to the underworld. Even Hugh and Furs in the distance felt a degree of weakness. Fortunately, this attack did not last. The corrupted baron returned to normal after one strike, leaning against the wall, pale-faced and panting, clearly unable to recover combat strength in a short time. No wonder the opponent had not used the sealed artifact in his hand for so long, it seemed the negative effects were significant. However, this one strike from the sealed artifact was enough, it completely broke the battle situation. The judge immediately began his offensive, death. He leaned forward and threw a punch. Hobert immediately became immobile, as if waiting for judgment, or for the arrival of a death sentence, standing rooted to the spot, waiting for the opponent's fist to accurately hit him. At this moment, Hobert discovered that he had lost control over 2 to 355 and the Order would. Yutravsky tried to condense a greatsword to block this blow for Hobert, but he couldn't condense it for a moment, showing the power of the sealed artifact's attack just now. Just as the fist reached Hobert's eyes, a skeleton wearing tattered clothes suddenly appeared in front of Hobert. The judge's punch shattered the skeleton's skull, sending it directly back to the spirit world. It was Dai. She had summoned an undead from the spirit world to block this fatal blow for Hobert. However, after doing all this, she also half-knelt on the ground, clearly unable to launch a new attack for a while. Seeing that one strike failed, the judge kicked Hobert in the lower abdomen. Hobert was kicked away, hitting the wall, and 2 to 355 slipped from his hand. The judge quickly stepped forward, preparing to pick up 2 to 355. At this moment, Yutravsky's greatsword finally condensed, but it was much dimmer than before. At this point, he couldn't care about these things. Yutravsky, holding the greatsword, swung at the judge. The judge had no choice but to dodge Yutravsky's attack, using exile to block Yutravsky. If it had been at the beginning of the battle, Yutravsky could have completely cut through exile with one sword, but now he couldn't. Exile completely stopped him. However, Yutravsky's attack gave Hobert a chance. Hobert, enduring the severe pain throughout his body, stumbled and crawled to pick up 2 to 355 and buried the judge underground. The operable space of 2 to 355 vertically was about 3 meters, which was enough to bury an opponent in the ground. However, in Backland, only the surfaces of main roads and major streets were hardened. The ground of ordinary streets was made of compacted burnt coal slag or gravel, so it wouldn't be muddy even when it rained. This level of street ground could not kill a Sequence 6 Beyonder, but it could temporarily trap him. This gave Hobert, Yutravsky, and Dai a chance to catch their breath. The road surface suddenly appeared like a fountain, with soil churning and emerging. The judge underground was using exile on the sand and soil above his head. Hobert quickly struggled to his feet and threw the opponent's astrologer in front of the spirit summoned by Apton. While the judge was wreaking havoc, the opponent's astrologer was protecting their corrupted baron and attacking Apton. She continuously used falling down and incineration on Apton. Apton was already bruised and swollen from falling, his clothes were tattered from burning, and his hair was burned off. If Hobert hadn't intervened, Apton would have died even more tragically than those two Sequence 8 Beyonders just now. The spirit summoned by Apton was also weakened by the sealed artifact's attack just now, but it still possessed some power. When the astrologer appeared in front of it, it reached out and choked the astrologer's neck. The astrologer lacked powerful extraordinary abilities. Her usual attacks like flash, incineration, and freeze had little effect on this spirit. Meanwhile, the opponent's corrupted baron was still leaning against the wall, unable to even lift his arm, clearly not yet recovered. Hobert seized this opportunity to bury the corrupted baron underground. At this moment, he was utterly defenseless and could only face the fate of being suffocated. No sooner had he finished these actions than the judge leapt out from underground. Hobert immediately moved him to the edge of the battlefield, preparing to let the judge leave, leaving the other Beyonders behind. Although Yutravsky and Dai Li's spirituality were slowly recovering, they were still no match for the judge. Moreover, the judge would certainly not dare to prolong the fight, because 2 to 355 was still in Hobert's hand, and the judge could not kill any of them. As time passed, Dai Li and Yutravsky would recover most of their spirituality in a few minutes, and then the judge would not be able to escape. The judge hesitated for a moment, then finally rushed towards the astrologer, clearly hoping to rescue the astrologer while Dai Li and the others were weak. At this moment, Yutravsky took out something like a syringe containing a tube of blood, and he injected this blood into his body. Hobert looked at the judge, his eyes already like he was looking at a dead man. Yutravsky possessed a miraculous item resembling a syringe, capable of restoring him to his peak condition for a brief period. He rarely used this item due to its significant negative side effects. The sealed artifact's attack had severely damaged and stunned Yutravsky, leaving him no opportunity to use it. However, since the judge chose not to flee but to return and save his companion, how could Yutravsky let him go? Under the judge's terrified gaze, Yutravsky once again condensed a solid greatsword, and the dawn light on his body brightened again. Hobert moved the judge under Yutravsky's greatsword, and although Dai Li's power had not yet recovered, she still summoned two ghostly hands to grab the judge's ankles. Yutravsky struck down, splitting the judge in two. Hobert sat on the ground, panting and laughing. This outcome was far greater than planned. An extraordinary characteristic of a Sequence 6 was worth around £6,500, and with the premium, a final transaction price of £8,000 to £8,500 was quite normal. Dai Li also leaned against a tree, resting with her arms crossed. The spiritual damage from today's battle was difficult to recover with ritual magic and could only be left to time, taking 3 or 4 days to recover on its own. Hobert looked up at Yutravsky and said, "Father, your final strike played a huge role. All your debts are paid off." In fact, Hobert had planned this from the beginning. No matter the outcome of this battle, as long as Yutravsky did his best, he would waive all of his debts. After all, Hobert spent £10 just to purchase the Heartmare candle, plus the £150 owed for the method of defeating one's past self. After deducting the £250 offset by the pharmacist potion, Yutravsky's debt was actually only £9–10. Of course, Hobert did not make a false report, because the Heartmare candle was indeed worth that much money. Hobert had this plan early on, firstly because he felt that Yutravsky fighting for him had truly paid off his debts. Secondly, he feared that Yutravsky might turn against Hobert after the battle due to coveting the spoils. After all, Yutravsky's negative personality was still present at this time. If the battle aroused his ferocity, and Dai Li was unwilling to help Hobert, he would certainly have to make more concessions to resolve the matter. The actual situation was that Yutravsky was still in his prime, while Dai Li was already very weak. So Hobert simply used the method of debt forgiveness to test Yutravsky, and of course, to stabilize him. "No, according to our previous agreement, I have only paid off half of the debt, Utravsky said, walking step by step back to the Harvest Church. Hobert smiled. What a trustworthy father. He also did not intend to continue pursuing the other half of the debt. At this moment, Apton's scream broke Hobert's thoughts. It turned out that the spirit summoned by Apton, after killing the astrologer, went to grab Apton, intending to strangle him as well. Hobert muttered, I told you, this is a suicidal sealed artifact. He looked at the spirit, then held 2 to 355, moved a notebook out of House 103, tore off a few blank pages, crumpled them into balls, and threw them at the spirit. The spirit seemed to have seen the most terrifying thing in this world, let out a shriek, and returned to the spirit world. At this moment, the leaves of the order wood began to fall, and before they reached the ground, they transformed into wisps of black mist, disappearing without a trace. The process of the large tree disappearing was very fast. After more than 10 seconds, the towering tree on the street was gone, leaving only an ebony-like wooden stick and a metal staff head that had fallen to the ground. Hobert began to use 2 to 355 to clean up the battlefield. He moved all the enemy's corpses to room 103, which Apton had rented. The corrupted Baron, who had previously been buried underground, had already suffocated to death. Then Hobert buried the bloodstains on the ground, filled the pit created by the judge, and finally, he did not forget to pick up the wooden stick and the metal staff head. Looking around, it was impossible to tell that a fierce extraordinary battle had just taken place here. However, the newly filled pit would certainly not be as solid as other compacted road surfaces. Perhaps after a heavy rain, it might reappear. Hobert couldn't worry about such long-term matters. The extraordinary characteristics of the 2 sequence 8 individuals who were killed first had already begun to precipitate. One was a barbarian, and the other was a sheriff. Dai Li, who entered last, said, I'll speed up the precipitation. Taking advantage of this gap, Hobert said to Zio and Furs, your contributions are enough to earn you the magician's potion formula, but I need to perform a spiritualistic ritual to obtain the formula first. I suggest you go back first. Come find me tomorrow, and I'll give you the potion formula. Zio and Furs still had a vague understanding of the concept of extraordinary characteristics. In their eyes, that sealed artifact should be the biggest gain tonight. They had this much self-awareness. Given their contributions, they certainly weren't qualified to share that sealed artifact. They were already very satisfied to receive the magician's potion formula. Hearing Hobert's words, Zio nodded and bid farewell to Furs. Hobert then exhorted, visiting the church 2 or 3 times a week can effectively avoid divination. Furs agreed. They, of course, remembered Hobert's words from that afternoon. The church could effectively influence the results of divination, which was very valuable knowledge for them. Watching Zio and Furs leave, Hobert planned to summon himself later and cast chaos power on the street outside to isolate all divination. Soon, Dai Li precipitated the extraordinary characteristics of the judge, the corrupted baron, and the astrologer in advance. All the spoils were gathered together, 1 sealed artifact and 5 extraordinary characteristics. Additionally, Apton had found 63 pounds and 6 soul in cash from their pockets, along with a crystal ball used for divination. Apton also wanted to take their rings and other accessories, but Hobert stopped him. These items were of little value and could easily be divined by the opponent's astrologer. Since the other side had companions skilled in divination, one must have a full anti-divination awareness. Hobert, according to the previous agreement, chose the spoils first. He naturally chose the sealed artifact in the shape of a black glove. Dai Li chose the judge's extraordinary characteristic. Next was the second round. Hobert took the corrupted baron's extraordinary characteristic, and Dai Li chose the astrologer's extraordinary characteristic. In the third round, Hobert chose the sheriff's extraordinary characteristic, and Dai Li took the barbarian's extraordinary characteristic. In the final round of choices, Hobert took the cash, and Dai Li was left with only the crystal ball. Factoring in the situation, Utravsky contributed more to the battle just now than Dai Li, yet the spoils Dai Li received already far exceeded 3,750 pounds. This was not only because the results of this battle far exceeded Hobert's expectations, but also because Dai Li was an official Beander. Sharing the spoils with Dai Li was also equivalent to bribing an official Beander. If the Night Watcher squad hadn't agreed, Utravsky, an illegal Beander in the Ruined Kingdom, would never have been able to fight so openly outside of the Harvest Church. It was also impossible for all the residents on the entire street to be asleep, without even a single person getting up in the night. Most importantly, by sharing the spoils with an official Beander, Hobert's gains became legitimate. In the final round of choices, the value of the crystal ball was slightly higher than cash, but Hobert had no use for the crystal ball and would have to risk finding a place to sell it, so it was better to simply choose cash. A scene suddenly appeared in Hobert's mind: the Tamara family's astrologer using divination to search for this crystal ball, only to find the Night Watcher squad's backland headquarters. Hobert's lips curled into a smile. The thought of that scene was amusing. Then Hobert carefully examined the sealed artifact, this black glove, and suddenly his spiritual perception sensed the sealed artifact's abilities and negative effects. It turned out that this sealed artifact was not, as Hobert had guessed, an item from the corpse collector path or related to demons. It actually came from an out-of-control law enforcer. Because it was a sealed artifact of the arbitrator path, Hobert's special connection with the country of disorder allowed his spirituality to establish a preliminary connection with the sealed artifact. The glove's ability is, it can imitate the appearance of a law enforcer to intimidate enemies, and use the law enforcer's gaze to sentence creatures within its line of sight to death. Those with weak spirituality will spontaneously obey this judgment. Their physical bodies will lose vitality, their spirituality will dissipate, truly death. The spirituality of low-sequence Beyonders will suffer severe damage that cannot be fully recovered. The spirituality of middle-sequence Beyonders will suffer injuries that require several days to recover. After using this ability, targets will all stiffen in place for 1 to 3 seconds. The negative effect is, for 10 minutes after using this ability, the holder will be like a lifeless zombie, losing all vitality and spirituality. After 10 minutes, spirituality will begin to recover, but it will take 10 hours to fully recover. After 5 cumulative uses, the holder will be prone to encountering a fatal destiny. After 10 cumulative uses, they will irreversibly meet the destiny of death. If it remains within 2 meters of a creature for 5 hours, that creature will immediately die. Hobert's heart first tightened. His first battle after advancing to Sequence 8 had actually caused his spirituality to suffer severe damage that could not be fully recovered. However, he immediately thought that spiritual injuries could also be treated with extraordinary potions or ritual magic, which might require some effort to research, but the problem should not be significant. Then Hobert frowned again. The power of this sealed artifact was indeed great, and it was also a sealed artifact with area of effect capabilities. But no matter how powerful it was, it could only be used 4 times. This is very suitable for Beander organizations to use. Klein uses it 4 times, Dunn uses it 4 times, that's 8 times. Moreover, it is most suitable for official Beyonders to use. Just like the Tamara family members encountered tonight, they would not dare to use this sealed artifact immediately because they do not know how strong their opponent is. If they lose an important combat force right away, they might become even more passive. Such an important sealed artifact would not be entrusted to one of the 2 Sequence 8s either. They could easily be killed in battle before they even had time to put on the glove. Anyway, when Hobert was stabbing someone, if he suddenly saw the opponent not running away but still putting on a glove, then he would definitely focus his attack on the enemy's hands. Without hands, what kind of glove could he put on? Official Beyonders are different. For example, in the Ruined Kingdom, which is the home ground of the Night Watchers, Punishers, and Mechanical Heart, they can readily use the glove's ability, and then other team members can reap the lives of their enemies. However, Hobert is currently fighting alone, so he has no immediate use for this sealed artifact. Seeing Dai Li diligently putting away the extraordinary characteristic, Hobert suddenly had an idea. "Madam, I think this sealed artifact should meet the standard for a grade 2, right?" He raised the glove in his hand. Dai Li nodded. That's right, it has indeed reached the grade 2 standard. Hobert said straightforwardly, I want to exchange it for the other half of the usage rights of 2 to 355, as well as an official external staff identification, 1 Briber extraordinary characteristic, and 2 Barbarian extraordinary characteristics. Dai Li was slightly taken aback. The trade proposed by Hobert was beneficial to the Night Watcher squad. The value of half a grade 2 sealed artifact is certainly higher than 1 sequence 7 and 2 sequence 8 extraordinary characteristics, and an external staff identification is just a piece of paper. However, because it involved a grade 2 sealed artifact, she could not make the decision. Bring the glove to the security company tomorrow morning. Our captain will give you a reply on whether the transaction can be completed. All right. Hobert felt that there was a good chance this transaction could be concluded. For him, although the power of 2 to 355 was not as great as the Black Glove, 2 to 355 was both practical and easy to use. When combined with the Order Wood, it even achieved an effect greater than 1 + 1 = 2. Dai Li packed up the spoils and pointed at the corpses. I'll help you deal with these corpses. No. Hobert refused. These are Apton's spoils, we will handle them. All right then. Dai Li did not ask about the purpose of the corpses. She took 2 to 355 and bid farewell to Hobert and Apton. With Dai Li's departure, only Hobert, Apton, and 5 corpses remained in the room. Hobert said, I need an undisturbed room. At the clock tower far from the Harvest Church, a Night Watcher squad member holding a thick, large telescope said, Captain, Dai Li is out, and she has given us the no accidents signal. Thomas stood by the clock tower window with his arms crossed, letting the cool breeze of early autumn blow through his robes. He was still reviewing the recent battle. It had to be said that this extraordinary battle was both intense and spectacular. Utravsky's and Dai Li's performances needed no further mention, as they were both Beyonders with rich combat experience. Hobert's performance, however, greatly surprised Thomas. Previously, when Dai Li reported Hobert's performance in the Henry family case, he thought it was just good luck for Hobert, who happened to have come into contact with a sealed artifact related to 2 to 355. But this battle today made Thomas see Hobert's calm and collected side, especially the large tree he summoned, which was very visually impactful, and their telescope couldn't even clearly see the situation under the canopy. One must know that the telescope was a grade 3 sealed artifact. There will be another chapter after 2 a.m. Author is going to eat first. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.